Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. This is an open Q&A, so we've got questions across the piece of all the things that we cover on this channel. Very broadly speaking, we will do the Song of Ice and Fire ones first, and then we'll do the Lord of the Rings ones second, and then all the other stuff after that. But we will be dotting around a little bit as we often do with these open Q&As. But let's get straight into a question from Lady Vaughan-Strauss, who I think I saw in the chat. Hi there, if you are there, saying, "Greetings, Robert and Dan. I hope you're well." We are, thank you. Laird Vaughan-Strauss would like to know if you can expand on the monsters that dwell beyond the wall. Ice spiders, ice dragons, the others, and to the like. Where did these tales originate from, and how far have they spread? Okay, so I thought I'd break this down very broadly. First of all, we've got some things which do exist. They are what we might call monsters, but at the same time, they're very real. And those are the children of the forest, who are north of the wall, perhaps more north of the wall than there are south of the wall, certainly around Raven's Cave. The giants that are thought of as kind of mythological creatures or creatures from the long past. In south of the wall, there are still some giants north of the wall, and similarly, direwolves. Nobody doubts that any of those three things did used to exist, but they thought that the children of the forest, this is at south of the wall, thought the children of the forest had all gone. They thought the giants had all gone, and direwolves, they do exist, but they don't come to the south. So that's the first set of things. People just remember that they are there. The second set of things are things associated with the others. So, for example, we've got the others themselves, the wights, ice spiders, and horses of the dead. That's the other thing they say in the World of Ice and Fire about what the others were riding in the first long night. Now, these are creatures of legend, and how they are, because they've not been seen for millennia now, but how they are remembered, how the stories keep going, is through the oral tradition. The oral tradition is kind of exemplarized by Old Man. That's what George R. R. Martin's given. I did a video on Old Man ages ago. Partly in response to, I saw a lot of people sort of saying, "Oh, is Old Man secretly this person or secretly that person?" And for me, what George R. R. Martin has done with Old Man was to create this expression of the oral tradition of storytelling within his story. Some of the things that Old Man says are true. Some of them are stories. Some of them she clearly shifts and emphasizes certain things to tailor them to the audience that she has at the time. She tries to scare Sansa in one of them by talking about the Titan of Braavos coming to life and eating noble-born girls, and it's just like, "Ah," says Sansa. And another time she focus in on Bran and sort of says, the Night's King, maybe he was a Stark, maybe he was a Bran, maybe he came from this very bedchamber. And it's like she would be telling these stories in ways that were still relevant to the people who are listening to them. But they were passed down generation to generation. They will have been recorded, as we've seen in World, by the Maesters. And then the Maesters, who will have been learning this kind of lore and history, they will then sort of go out and be training the next generation in Westeros. Have those stories spread further wide to Essos and places? Well, to the learned perhaps, but they have their own legends and stories of the Long Night. So they don't need to be relying on what Westeros says. They've got their own stories, Azor Ahai, and so on. And then you also ask specifically about ice dragons. Now, we do get, I thought I'd just read you a quote, because we do get a a specific quote about ice dragons in the world of Ice and Fire. We often think, oh, is this going to be a bit like it was Viserion, the dragon who sort of became an ice dragon in Game of Thrones? That's not going to happen in the books, but we often think that might be what it is. But it turns out that ice dragons here in the world of Ice and Fire, that we're talking about a very specific thing. This is what it says. Of all the queer and fabulous denizens of the shivering sea, however, the greatest are the ice dragons. These colossal beasts, many times larger than the dragons of Valyria, are said to be made of living ice, with eyes of pale blue crystal and vast translucent wings through which the moon and stars can be glimpsed as they wheel across the sky. Whereas common dragons, if any dragon can truly be said to be common, breathe flame, ice dragons supposedly breathe cold, a chill so terrible that it can freeze a man solid in half a heartbeat. Sailors from 100 nations have glimpsed these great beasts over the centuries, so mayhaps there is some truth behind the tales. Archmaester Margate has suggested that many legends of the North, freezing mists, ice ships, Cannibal Bay, and the like, can be explained as distorted reports of ice dragon activity. Though an amusing notion and not without a certain elegance, this remains the purest conjecture. As ice dragons supposedly melt when slain, no actual proof of their existence has ever been found. So that's what the Maesters say. But it's worth noting what they say. Sailors from 100 nations have glimpsed these great beasts over the centuries. Ice dragons, we're not going to meet an ice dragon, I very much suspect, in this story. But they are there. They are. This is a good example of how the Maesters seem to approach anything that is vaguely magical, vaguely mysterious. They recognise the fact that it's there, that people. There have been many sightings that this is a part of people's culture, but then they sort of dismiss it as being fanciful, and we have not really got any evidence, and so on. So. How far have that rumours of ice dragons spread? Seemingly right across the world, which for me implies that they are probably very real, in the same way that krakens, for example, are real in this world. We haven't seen them yet in the story, but I think we probably will. So hopefully that's given you sort of an overview of some of the denizens of north of the Walder, the monsters that are up there. Stephanie Lash saying, "Hello, Robert. Thanks for your devotion to these stories. We know a fair bit about how much George R. R. Martin respects Tolkien. What do you suspect Tolkien's reaction would be to the A Song of Ice and Fire and to George R. R. Martin's world?" Oh, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think we should be honest and say two things. The first is that I think that Tolkien would have appreciated the quality of the writing. There's no doubt in my mind, at least, George R. R. Martin does write well. He writes on a number of different levels, and it rewards rereading. And this was something that Tolkien and Lewis, incidentally, have both said at various times, is that this is how you can tell good fiction, when it's not just about charging through the story and getting caught by surprise by the twists and turns of the plot, but it's when you're going back and enjoying the fiction for what it is, the quality of the language, the ebb and flow of the story. That is what makes good fiction, and the fact that we're still coming back to this after all this time shows that this is good fiction. So I think the first thing is that Tolkien would have appreciated it as good fiction. I think he would, though, probably have found it a little bit too dark and visceral and without hope for his tastes. If you've ever sort of come across his reaction to Dune, then you're probably quite close to where he would be thinking about George R. R. Martin. Is that with Dune, then he kind of he actually rejected the opportunity to write a review of it because he didn't want to be rude about something he didn't like in the press, which is very big of him. So he didn't feel that he had to make a particular point about it. He didn't like Dune. The reason he didn't like Dune was that it was doing the opposite to what The Lord of the Rings was doing. The Lord of the Rings is trying to inspire hope and escapism in us, in the reader. Dune is trying to warn you. This is high level ish, so without wishing to get bogged down in the details, but it's warning you about certain things by taking you on a journey towards a dark place. So Tolkien did not like that as a style. That wasn't what he was about, and he thought that the human spirit was more wanting the uplifting, escapist type of approach. So, I think that Tolkien's approach to George R. R. Martin's work would have been multi-layered, and I suspect George R. R. Martin does understand that and appreciate that. Jay Davitt. Hi, Robert, frequent listener, my favourite show. Oh, thank you very much. Could you do a top 10 of the books and then of all-time fighters in A Song of Ice and Fire? Of the books and then of all-time fighters, off the top of my head, it would be quite hard. But in terms of the names that I think, throw some names out in the chat as well if you want. But the names which come up, we can talk, I think, quite easily about who in world the fighters that we know of rated highly. And it's very clear. So Jamie seems to think that Arthur Dane was the greatest that he ever knew. And then we have Barristan Selmy, who also is somewhere up and around that. But clearly Jamie thought that he was maybe a notch below. Jamie himself was viewed by Barristan Selmy as being the most skilled fighter of his age. When you're coming sort of forward a little bit in time, then you've got to look at some people like Loras Tyrell as being incredibly impactful fighter, also with a very different style, the Mountain. And if you say that the Mountain is a very good fighter, then you also obviously have to go with Oberyn Martell, who did best the Mountain. And if he wasn't trying to extract a confession from the Mountain, he would have killed him and walked away with his life. So you can probably sort of tier list those a little bit if you want. If you go back, then certainly the most famous fighter in the Targaryen era, you're probably looking at Aemon the Dragon Knight. And before that, there's a number of particularly fearsome fighters. Maegor was notably a very fierce fighter. I mean, I tend to resist doing these top 10 lists simply because you can miss out things, and it's a matter of personal opinion. But I think what we can do is say, in world, what do people think? And in world, there is this kind of clear within Westeros, at least, there's this clear kind of tier list. Arthur Dane, over the course of the last couple of decades or so, Arthur Dane at the top, Barristan Selmy up there as well, Jamie kind of a notch down from that, but still epically good, and so on. When you get over to Essos, then you add in a whole other range of people in there. Keith Wright saying, nice to see you, Robert. I love the care you take. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. Lady Pushkins, do you think Summer will die in the cave? And if so, when she becomes a white, will Bran be able to walk or not? Do whites have a consciousness? My instinct is that Summer will probably survive. I couldn't say that for certain. The names of the direwolves, just to be clear, we often talk about the names as being sort of prophetic, telling us about the future. This is absolutely true, but the names of the direwolves are associated with the fates of their owners, not their own fates. So we can learn very little about their own fates from this. As I say, my instinct is probably Summer will survive, but maybe not. We will certainly lose at least one character up there in Bloodraven's cave. Probably two. One of them's probably already gone, sadly. But do I, just as the second part, if Summer did become a white, would Bran be able to walk? I think the answer here seems to be no. In that he can skin change into alive animals and people. Hodor as well, remember, and the birds when he's up there. And we often forget this, but he gets this training montage chapter, and in Dance with Dragons, and in that Bloodraven teaches him how to skin change into the birds who are there. So he can now skin change into a number of different things, but they're all living things. The power that the others have seems to be the same or very similar, except it applies to dead things. So they can control dead animals and dead humans in the way that Bran could control live animals and live humans. I think at some stage we are going to be invited to just pause and ask ourselves who are the worst here out of these two skills, which is the darkest actually when you really think about it, because instinctively we're seeing this through Bran's POV, and we think, oh, they can animate the dead, this is horrible. But then if you stop and think, what Bran's doing is he's going into another human's mind, pushing them to one side and taking control of their body and doing with it what he wants. That is also pretty dark and horrific. So at some point, George R. R. Martin hasn't explicitly done so yet, but at some point I suspect we're going to be invited to see the difference between those two different things. And so yeah, I'm not. I think it would be unwise at this stage to say that Bran cannot do things, because he's still only just starting out with his powers. But I think all we've seen thus far suggests that he only can skin change into living things. Not sure. Thank you very much for the super sticker, Michael Trainer. Saying, building off of the top 10 fighters question, pretend you're on trial in Westeros. Choose 6 people from the series to fight alongside you in a trial of the 7. Oh. Well, leaving aside any kind of group dynamics of whether they could work together well, probably I would go with something along the lines of what the names that I've cut. And I think you have to say people like Barristan the Bold, simply because he is capable of such epic feats of heroism. If you go back through his history, the things that he did were just like, wow, that's pretty amazing. I think you similarly, Aemon the Dragon Knight, pretty amazing stuff, and Arthur Dane. So in terms of 3 pure swordsmen, I think you probably have to have those 3. I think you'd need to have the big, bulky fighter who I don't know who you can allow in your 6, but if you can't have the mountain, then why don't we have 1-1? And I think you need at least one wily clever person, whether that's Bronn or Oberyn Martell. And then who's the 6th? I say Brienne. Simply because yes, she's a very good fighter, but also if the faith are real and if she's on your side, you kind of have some kind of purity on your side as well. So yeah, interesting question. Thank you. Let's. Oh, Armando suggesting Bran. Bran would be an interesting one to have in your. Uh, yes, in your trial. Um, he could certainly do some damage. Let's put it that way. But let's go with Catherine Furseth saying, "Hi, Robert, and firstly, thank you for the large output of videos in the past few weeks. Yeah, I kind of upped it a little bit. I had a burst of creativity. All this talk about swords. I've done quite a few videos on swords. Actually, thank you for reminding. Just in case you've missed on the main channel, I did a. It wasn't intended initially to be a series on swords, but I sort of got on a bit of a roll, looking at Valyrian steel swords. So it's like, what actually is Valyrian steel? Where are all of these Valyrian steel swords? And then I've kind of focused in on a few different swords of Blackfire, Dark Sister, Ice. I might do one on Dawn. Would you like one on Dawn? It's not a Valyrian steel sword, but the House Dane sword. I thought that might be quite fun as well. Anyway, all this talk of swords made me think of the strange mirroring of Aegon IV's role in both the ancestral swords of House both of the ancestral swords of House Targaryen, ending up lost or outside history, giving Blackfire to his bastard Daemon Rivers, and also giving Dark Sister to Bloodraven, another bastard son, if that was him. Do we actually know? If it was, do you think that this was meant as an insult to the last owner, Aemon the Dragon Knight, or were both gifts on a whim? Okay, so let's just do a few quick dates, just so because we do not know who gave. We know Aegon IV. Yes, he gave the sword Blackfire to Daemon Waters, as he was known then, his bastard son, and this was. One of the things which it didn't cause the Blackfire Rebellion, because that didn't happen for quite some time some time after that, but it did allow people to rally around after Daemon Blackfire, as he called himself. So important a gift, he considered that he changed his name to it. So that was clearly very significant, and we know how that transaction happened. Dark Sister, we don't know. So Dark Sister has always been, and was until this point in Targaryen history, it was like the second sword we get in House Targaryen. Blackfire was the sword. This was the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, and the kings had that sword. Aegon the Conqueror had it, Maegor had it, Jaehaerys had it, Viserys had it, Aegon II at his coronation, he had it, held it aloft, you saw in House of the Dragon. After that, we see Daemon I had it as he went into to Dawn, and Aegon IV had it. This was the sword of kings. This was the most important sword. However, they had the second sword, Dark Sister. Dark Sister tended to go to a more sort of, I say, the cool character, not necessarily the king, but somebody who is a chief supporter, lieutenant of the king, somebody who can fight, but maybe then that's not, they're not the king, but they're sort of by the right hand side of the king. So Visenya had it to start with. We know Aemon the Dragon Knight had it, and Bloodraven had it. Now, Aemon the Dragon Knight died in the year 175, and so that's the point at which the sword became available, as it were. And so he died at some point between 17. I'm getting my dates wrong. He died at some point between 178 and 183. 175 was when Bloodraven was born. So the oldest Bloodraven could have been when he died was when Aemon died was 8. So he's still a child at this point. And although we're told that he still and his mother still had friends in court, he still was the bastard son from a previous not wife of Aegon IV, from mistress of Aegon IV. So he will have been seen around and about, but he wasn't completely flavour of the month. Now, Aegon died in the year 184. So by this point, Bloodraven's about 9. That still feels too young to me for him to have been given this sword at the age of 9. So very probably at some point between 184, which was when Aegon IV died, and 195, which was when the first Blackfire Rebellion happened, at some point in that period, Bloodraven got the sword, which kind of makes sense. So when the Blackfire, if you forget the years now, just think about the ages. The start of the Blackfire Rebellion, Bloodraven was 20. Daemon was quite a bit older, incidentally, but he was 20. So probably at some point in the few years leading up to that, he will have been given the sword by the king, Daeron II, who, right from the off, when he took power, he knew that there were rumours swirling about his parentage, that maybe Aegon IV didn't want him to be king. So he made a point, we're told, in the first few years of his kingship, he made a point of getting rid of his father's courtiers and bringing his own people in, solidifying his base around him, while at the same time a rift was growing up between Daemon Blackfire and the king, but also specifically Bloodraven. Or to be more precise, the chief supporter of Daemon was Aegor Rivers Bittersteel, who had a huge rivalry with Bloodraven, who was the chief supporter of King Daeron. So during this period, it makes absolute sense that the king, with this sword, he wasn't a particular fighter. He gave that Valyrian steel sword to his closest ally, who was a Bloodraven. So I think that's the answer to the question, is that it wasn't actually Aegon IV. And so although, yes, I agree, it would be very interesting if he were the person to give away those swords to their last known users. It probably wasn't him. Okay, let's go to the chat. And I think we had another Martin S saying, good evening, Robert. Hi there, Martin. I've got a question or two, I think, from you coming up. I will get to them soon. Hope you and your dog are well. We are. Thank you very much indeed. And Martin S saying, I watched the first 4 episodes of The Wheel of Time Season 3. The scene where Matt manages to defeat Galad and Gawain with the staff got adapted. Fun at first, but at the end of the book series, Galad is a better person than Matt, in my opinion. Less fun then. So Wheel of Time, I have watched episodes 1 to 3. Don't tell me what happens in episode 4. I've not managed to see that one yet. But if you enjoyed season 2 of The Wheel of Time, in my mind, season 1 of The Wheel of Time was good. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't great. Season 2, I felt, was a big step up. Season 3 seems, so far, if anything, to have gone another notch up again. Really enjoyed it. It's, as an adaptation, I am a fan of The Wheel of Time. I'm not as nerdy about that as I am other things, but I can see, yes, there are some changes from the books. Broadly speaking, the changes were clearly made in order to make a good TV adaptation. And broadly speaking, I kind of like those changes. So, give it a go. If you enjoyed season 2, give it a go. Lucas S, who's been a channel member for 15 months. Thank you so much. Which I should just say, patrons Thank you. If you wish to support this channel, I hugely appreciate that. The best way to do that is through Patreon. There's a link down in the description. Um, if for whatever reason you don't want to do Patreon, you can be a channel member here. There should be a link somewhere. I don't know where on your screen, but there should be a link somewhere. And that means that you can get your messages in the chat, sort of highlighted for me. And here Lucas is saying, good evening, Robert and all IDG viewers, sitting around with my cats while listening and playing Helldivers 2. I don't know Helldivers 2, but I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. So thank you very much for that. And what I'm doing, thanks. Moderators, you are amazing. Thank you so much. If you're here in the chat, please just give a little bit of love to the moderators because they are absolutely wonderful. Impending Inspiration just spotted in the chat saying, although I'm a Lord of the Rings fan and enjoy your videos, I have trouble with other fantasy. You addressed an issue with The Song of Ice and Fire, hope versus hopelessness. Can you give me a reason to give it a real try? Well, I enjoy it, which I hope is a reason. I think so. I know some Tolkien fans feel the exact as I sort of set out. There's a difference in feel. What I would say is if you're a big Tolkien fan, if you imagine this more as first age stuff, if you're in the Silmarillion, what happened in the first age, when you read the stories, they're kind of, some of them are really quite dark and quite disturbing. That's the kind of feel you've got going on here with George R.R. Martin. Now, the subgenre which has been largely named after this and other books which follow in this tradition is grimdark, um, uh, which kind of sets the tone. I don't necessarily think that's fair because there are definitely bright moments within A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's the quality of the storytelling which is the thing. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But I think that this is as well written a fantasy as I've read since Tolkien. So that's my recommendation. Uh, Try it, give it a go. If you like it, fantastic. Question from Michael Trainer. If Varys is a secret Targaryen born in Lys, do we have any leads on named Essos-based Targaryens that could be his parents or grandparents? How likely do you think this is? Okay, so excuse me. I think this is something which comes up a few times. I did do a video on Varys if you want my sort of more detailed thoughts on Varys and might he possibly be a Targaryen or something. There are hints within the text. The fact that he shaves his head makes people wonder: is this like Egg in Duncan Egg, where he shaves his head so people can't see the silver gold of his hair? Or similarly, we get some interesting comments in book one. Cat arrives and thinks to her in King's Landing and thinks to herself, only Targaryens know the secrets of the Red Keep. And then suddenly Varys appears and says, I know the secrets of the Red Keep. And it's like, okay, does this mean you're secretly a Targaryen? So there's lots of these kind of things which, if you want to interpret them as hints, you can. But I don't think at the moment we've had anything anywhere remotely near a smoking gun on this. However, the thought is still there. Might he be a secret Targaryen or Blackfire or whatever? So are there any Targaryens who were over there in Lys? Well, it depends how far back you want to go, really. We had a couple of Targaryens who have been over there. You had Aerion Brightflame Targaryen, who spent some time in exile over in Essos. You obviously had, if you go further back, Daemon Targaryen was over there for a little while as well. Sarah, if you go back to I've got a question on Sarah. Actually, Sarah Targaryen. If you go back to the time of Jaehaerys and Alicent, one of their daughters, Sarah, went over and worked in a pillow house in Lys, and then moved to Volantis and owned a pleasure house there. So there are various Targaryens who have been over there. There's a few others that you could have been. Viserys the Second was over there as a young man as well. There are lots who you could just sort of say they have been over there. And is it possible that therefore he could be a descendant of them? Yes. But I think the other thing is that we don't, because we've not actually been to Lys in the books, certainly not in the show, I think we can easily overlook the fact that a huge amount of people in Lys have got Valyrian heritage. There's more dotted around all of the free cities. Now, this isn't just Targaryens. This is people who have their heritage coming from the Valyrian freehold. Volantis has a lot of people who claim direct ancestry from the Valyrian freehold. So, and obviously we get the Blackfires. We had a few generations of Blackfires who were based over in Essos. So, trying to find someone who could potentially be an ancestor of a random person who is Valyrian or potentially even Targaryen is not hard. There are plenty of options there. How likely do I think it is? I don't think it's likely. For me, the biggest and most intriguing clue is actually if Varys is telling the truth about his background and being handed over to this magician who made a sacrifice of his private parts and then sort of kicked him out. That seems to imply that he must be someone important-ish, unbeknownst to himself, for the simple reason that if a wizard just wished to make a random sacrifice, he didn't need to pay the leader of a troop of mummers to get one of their young stars out. He could have picked up any kid off of the street and used them, but he didn't. He very specifically chose Varys. That's if Varys is to be believed, which he may or may not. In the context of him telling that story, he is trying to prove to Tyrion that he does not like magic. And he's trying to get on Tyrion's side. And that's exactly the kind of story he would have told if he wanted to do that. Gilio saying, what exactly qualifies someone as king beyond the wall? Is it whomever can unify all the wildlings, the most powerful warlord, or is it totally arbitrary? So this is not a title that the wildlings themselves use. As you can tell, the king beyond the wall is something that is used by people south of the wall. And people south of the wall seem to, we get this throughout the story, there seems to be this complete confusion about what this idea is, who might be the king beyond the wall, and how do you become king beyond the wall. And you get Selyse, for example, Queen Selyse, Stannis's queen. She is actively trying to, when she's up at the wall, she's actively trying to be doing some politically advantageous marriages between some wildlings and some southerners, and she's there having this conversation with Tormund about who who's going to be taking over from Mance and who's next in line. And Tormund's like, that's just not how it works. So don't look for who is the heir, who's Mance's children. Where's Mance's child? That's not the point. So it's not inherited. This is not a title that is given to them by the wildlings. This is a title that is used by the people south of the wall when there is a large mass of the wildlings with a clear, distinct leader. Usually when they're heading south for whatever reason. Now, how do they get to be this leader figure? It's whoever they follow. That's the way that they describe it, and as far as we can tell, that seems to be how it works. Mance got to be the leader, the king beyond the wall, because he was the person who pulled everyone together and said, we need to go south. And everybody agreed, and they let him lead them. Probably in that he had to fight a few people. But it's not just, they don't have like a big competition and whoever wins the competition and kills everybody else, they get to be a king beyond the wall. If people don't wish to have a big leader, then they just don't follow them. They just stay in their own little tribe. So it's a lot more fluid a position than that of a formal thing. Centuries could go by without a king beyond the wall. Martin S. saying, I think hope versus hopelessness is purely a matter of personal taste and not a matter of quality per se. If you want hope only, George R. R. Martin isn't for you. Absolutely. A quick flick through the chat. Martin S. saying, I think Wheel of Time Season 3 is a major step up from earlier seasons. But I do agree with YouTuber Daniel Green that they overdid it when more gays threatened Sian. Yeah, I mean, I don't think they get it right all of the time. I personally have no idea. Maybe he'll come back later in Season 3. My favourite character from the books is Tom Merrilin. I was disappointed that they took him out from Season 2. And they've kind of changed a lot of the dynamics between the characters that didn't necessarily need to be changed, in my view. So, yes, I think he's a step up. But I can understand the people who do love those books. This is their, and actually, slight digression, but I do think on this sometimes, is that the fandoms are in different places. I've got a question about fandoms a bit later, but I'll say this bit now. Fandoms are in different places when it comes to the adaptations of their books. If we're talking about books being made into films or TV shows, that the Tolkien fandom can critique some things here and there, obviously, and they do. But the Tolkien fandom are in this wonderful position where they know that no matter what, there's going to be another adaptation along sooner or later. Most Tolkien fans have lived through the films, plus there are some animated films back in like 70s or 80s. There's a magnificent radio adaptation out there. There's some earlier ones which were slightly less magnificent. There's 2-3 different versions of the audiobooks going around now. We've got the Rings of Power series. We've got there was animated War of the Rohirrim thing which came out. We've got, I've lost count of how many different video games there are happening. There's new things going on all the time. If you don't like an adaptation of Tolkien, you can just not do it, and you can just wait for the next thing, which is going to happen in a year or so's time. In 2-3 years' time, we're going to get the next thing, which is going to be the Hunt for Gollum. So that's a big screen by the people who brought you the Lord of the Rings films. Andy Serkis is going to be directing. So that is a completely different situation to fandoms like the Wheel of Time fandom, who this is their one shot. That the books that they love have been adapted for the screen. If that was a complete miss, that would not be adapted again for a very long time. If it's a massive hit, there would be spin-offs, there would be video games, there would be whatever. As it turns out, it's probably somewhere in the middle. But they don't have the luxury of knowing that there will be something else coming along in a year or two's time. So these different fandoms have different places, and so I can actually have a huge amount of sympathy for a Wheel of Time fan who thinks this is it, this is the one chance, and I really don't want them to muck it up. Lord of the Rings fans can afford to be a little bit more relaxed because there will be another adaptation. Right, anyway, that was a complete digression. Let's go to Northern Tommy asking how dark the Wheel of Time is, or is it high fantasy? It's high fantasy in the sense of you got people weaving lots of magic out there. Everybody knows that magic exists and is out there. I wouldn't personally call it dark. It's more of a classic good versus evil, and the Dark One is there, and these guys are trying to stop it, stop the end of the world. There are layers within that. Wheel of Time fans, I do understand this about, is this guy going to save the world or go mad or whatever? There are layers to this, but it is a lot more of a kind of, we have hope that we can, the good guys can win kind of thing. Whereas A Song of Ice and Fire, I don't think we're thinking, oh, I hope the good guys win. It's like we're going to end up with a bittersweet ending. Right, let's go to a question from James Horner saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you are doing well. I am. Thank you. Septon Meribald's Broken Men speech and the meeting between Davos and Lord Manderley in the cellar are among my favourite scenes from A Song of Ice and Fire. I was a bit disappointed that they didn't make it into the show. Were there any scenes that you were disappointed didn't make the cut?" Yeah, well, both of those were great scenes. Um, I don't. I mean, in terms of specific scenes, then one thing which I was quite sad about, partly because it meant that we didn't get a much wider plot, but I love the 2-3 chapters we have of Tyrion on the Shy Maid when he's figuring out what's going on with this strange group of people that he's being mixed up with, and he's like, okay, so Haldon, I've kind of figured you out now. Griff, I figured you out now. Young Griff, I figured you out now. And he's sort of going through and working out one by one who everyone is. And because it just brings this sense of not purpose yet in Tyrion's life, but he reached absolute rock bottom. He'd drunk his way across the narrow sea, and then suddenly his brain engages. Something's going on, and we see the Tyrion again that we know, and I love those. I also think so much of the Dornish plot I would have loved more in the TV show. Let's go to another one from James Horner. What are your thoughts on the fan theory that Princess Sarah, this is Sarah Targaryen, who we were talking about a moment ago, was sold to a pleasure house rather than going there willingly? So the background here is, so this is the daughter of Jaehaerys and Alicent, the one that seems to have broken Jaehaerys's heart. They had a lot of children, and she seems one of the more sort of willful and independent ones. And she was hanging out with some friends. She was still a teenager at the time, hanging out with some friends, and then there was a bit of a scandal that went on. Turns out she'd been sleeping with some people, and Jaehaerys was angry with this, and he sort of confines her to her room, basically, and she tries to escape. She tries to go to the dragon pit and steal a dragon, gets caught, hauled back. Jaehaerys is even more angry with her. So he then sends her to Old Town. You're going to go and learn to be a scepter. She gets sent down there. She obviously hates it. And she escapes. Nobody knows where she's gone. For 6 months, she's disappeared. And then she's discovered in Lys, in this pillow house in Lys. And apparently, we're told she went there of her own volition, and basically Jaehaerys says, she's dead to me now. And Alicent says, no, I want to stay in contact. Maybe she can come back. But Jaehaerys is no. And this sort of the bigger story from the Jaehaerys and Alicent perspective is that this clearly this bothered Jaehaerys right up to the very end of his life. Then we have Alicent, who is there, who is sort of like helping the very old King Jaehaerys, reading to him. He sometimes calls her Sarah. So clearly, in his what the time was some kind of age adult. We don't know all the details, but clearly he was getting confused in his old age, and that's where his mind went, which is a surefire sign that was clearly what was still in his heart. One of the things that bothered him most about his life. Anyway, Sarah, she seems to have done well. She moved to Volantis, where she became an owner of a pleasure house, and then she was sort of asked, did she, when Jaehaerys died, they had to have a great council, or Jaehaerys was about to die, they had to have a great council, who's going to take over after him. And polite inquiries were made. She said, no, why would I want to? I have a kingdom here already. I'm living a very happy life. It's all good. But apparently, three people who claimed to be her children did head over and were passed over for the same. So that's the story. Is there a possibility that she didn't choose to go there, but she got sold there by somebody? I mean, we don't have that bit of the story, so possibility has to be there. My instinct, though, is that probably not, for the simple reason that we're told Alicent, although Jaehaerys forbade her from having any contact with Sarah, then Alicent ignored it. This is her daughter, and she not only wrote to her every now and then, and Sarah never replied, but not only wrote to her every now and then, but she also she hired people, we're told, to keep an eye on her, just to see what's going on. Now, that implies to me that if any hint had come out here that she was taken there not of her own volition, that she did not want to be there, at least, then I think Alicent would have found out and probably would have told Jaehaerys, but we don't get that. Similarly, the fact that Sarah doesn't reply to the letters seems to imply that she holds a grudge against them. And if she holds a grudge against them, that's probably because she blames them for everything, and that adds weight to the idea that she ran off. She certainly was trying to escape. She tried to get that dragon. So I've not seen the fan theory. I have to admit, I've not read it or seen it anywhere, so I don't know. Maybe there's some more evidence, but subject to any further evidence, that's my basic take on it. Richard Johnson saying, this may have been covered, but I'm wondering how Fagon will take Storm's End when no other force has. Do you think Edric Storm will be involved? I don't think Edric Storm will necessarily be involved. I forget the name now of the people who've been left in charge of Storm's End. So, because this is quite important. So, Storm's End was kind of left on its own by Stannis, and he, because Renly fell basically, he installed people there, and the second in command was a little bit grudging, wanted to be in charge. I kind of have this instinct that it wasn't taken by force. It will have been, they'll have let them in. And why? Well, who are they going to be? Storm's End was where Renly was. Renly's gone, so and he was gone because Stannis took him out, and then Stannis has also disappeared completely and headed up to the wall and abandoned them. The people there don't feel loved by the Baratheons, and if somebody else has turned up, who with John Connington, who probably some people will know because he was a lord of the Stormlands, and maybe they just think we should probably back this guy. He's got a massive army, and the Baratheons have abandoned us. So I think it's not going to be a full out assault. I think they'll just be handed over. Right, let's go to Commander Ray. Hello, Robert. With over a decade since Dance and A Fool's Guess on when Winds will be released, we have to look at why George R. R. Martin is struggling so much and understand just how hard writing is. And my question is in regards to those struggles. If he manages to finish his story, his priorities at this point have to have changed to completing it and making a good conclusion. Which might mean certain things could change, such as a bittersweet ending, which is hard to land. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on just how much could be changed if he has to knuckle down and omit several key storylines. Right, so I think that he won't omit several key storylines. He is most of the way. We obviously don't know, but last update we had was that he was 75% of the way through the Winds of Winter. I see absolutely no reason why, and I've heard of no reason why that's not true. So he's most of the way through the Winds of Winter, which means he's just got one book left. Now, the way that this is written, I think I've got another question, something similar a bit later, but the way this is written has been to sort of expand the story out, and then it's going to have to contract back in. He's already said he's not going to introduce any new POV characters. People will die. The story itself, geographically, will start to focus more and more back in on Westeros. We can expect to see Arya moving from Braavos back over to Westeros. We can see Dany probably accompanied by Tyrion, Barristan, and a whole host of other people heading off back towards Westeros. The story is going to start compacting down. And so I don't think he doesn't strike me as the kind of person who would just go, oh, you know what, I've been trying to write this for a long time. I'll just ignore that storyline over there. I think he would rather write 80% of the story he wants than 100% of a story that he's not happy with. There has to be an element of this which he will subconsciously probably, but also quite a lot consciously, be aware of the fact that this is going to be poured over by people, and people are going to be judging him on this book, particularly now he's taken so much time over it. They're going to be comparing it to Game of Thrones. They're going to be comparing it to previous books. They're going to be looking at the sales. They're going to be wanting any angle. There's going to be articles all over the place with every single angle on this story you can possibly get. So, yes, there's a huge amount of pressure on. But I think his response to that, everything I've seen suggests that his response is to write the best thing that he possibly can, not just cut a few corners. So my take is that he knows the ending. We often talk about, because he often talks about being a Gardner writer and how he just sort of like he doesn't have a plan and a structure. He just sort of goes off and follows down a few paths down and then maybe has to come back and start again. That is true, but he's also said many, many times that he knows the ending. he knows where we're heading, and the closer we get to that, then the easier the story will be to write. Willie Wiggs 2000. If the playlist Robert Rhaegar, Lyanna, and all that came back to Patreon, I'll insta sign up. Well, I will. Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment that I suspect it was intended as. The If you go onto Patreon, you would be able to find the original things on there. I've uploaded all of the audio and the scripts for all of my videos. I mean, I can't promise that from a few years back I might have missed one or two here or there, but certainly if you're wanting any of my videos, that's one of the perks of being a patron, is you get the scripts and you get the audio. And I will be, just so you're aware of this, I will be redoing every single one of those videos on Robert's Rebellion playlist. I am holding off just for one little bit, for the simple reason that I think we're going to get a whole lot of more information very soon. Or if not very soon, then within the year or so, through the stage play. The stage play is going to be based on the tourney at Harrenhal. George R. R. Martin has been very involved in this. He's not the script writer, but they have to have consulted him. He has been talking to them lots. He will know which things he has to. He is okay for them to be revealing. And I think once we get that, we will get confirmation on a whole load of things, even things as simple and straightforward as the extent to which Rhaegar was trying to use that tournament in order to have a kind of a soft Great Council, in order to kind of launch a soft coup against his father. That bit, I think we will get some clear confirmation on, and we might well get clear confirmation on a whole host of other things. So much happened at the tourney at Harrenhal. So I'm just kind of holding back for a little bit. And for those who haven't kept us up to speed with where this is, and I have to say, probably out of all of the A Song of Ice and Fire related things, other than the books, this is the one I'm most excited about, the stage play. And it is now pretty much written, as far as we can tell. They have pushed this out. I'm not really in the theatre world, but I've spoken to people who are in the London theatre scene, and so what they tell me is that with this, the way that they go is that they sort of run this through with the theatre owners, and they say they sort of sit them down and they have like a proper run through and say, and show them, here's the script, here's the plans, this is what we're wanting to be doing, this is how how long it will probably take us to get this up and running, work through all of the practicalities, and then the theatre owners will say if this is something that they're wanting. And this would be quite a big thing. I mean, London theatre, it tends to sell out in the main West End shows, but this would be huge for whoever takes this on. So what we're told is that they've gone through this process. They've talked across the piece to all of these different places, and they have their choice of where to do it. So we're now waiting on confirmation that this is going to happen at such and such a theatre. The timing then is dependent largely on two factors, one of which is, frankly, what's that theatre got on at the moment already? Is that they booked a run until a certain period, because they can't start obviously showing it until whatever's in there at the moment has gone. And secondly, they will have to get it actually set up. They'll have to do the casting. They'll have to do the building, the structure of the set, and any special effects, because increasingly these kinds of things use the magic of theatre to immerse you in what's going on. So I'm expecting they will have to do a whole lot of thinking about stuff to do with the fact that this is a tourney. Are we going to have? We're probably not going to have actual horses going across the stage, but are they going to do mechanized horses? Are they going to be projecting things? What are they going to do? Puppet horses? I don't know. I've literally no idea how they would do these things, but that would all take a little while. The thinking was 2025. So we've still got 9 months in the year. That's still eminently doable. And if I had to guess, probably in the last quarter of this year. Had a question from Silly Head saying, keep the great videos coming. Thank you very much. The biggest difference between the show ending and the book ending, what would you predict? That is, if we ever get to the dang books. Well, I mean, a lot of this depends on what you count as the biggest differences. I remember back at he's been a slightly more sort of open since then, but I can remember back at the time when Game of Thrones season 8 came out and George R. R. Martin was asked, is the ending of the book going to be the same as the show? And he said yes and no and yes and no and yes and no. And he gave this is in a blog post somewhere. If you went right back through his archives, you'd be able to find it. And he set out the reasons. And what he said was the reasons are, on the TV show, there are some characters who are alive who are going to die in the books. There are some characters in the books who have never even been on the TV show, who will have quite a big impact. And there are some characters who he didn't quite say it in this way, but the endings that they get, because they've contracted storylines and the butterfly effects of stuff that's happened over 8 seasons, some people's endings will be different. So the implication was that the broad shape is the same, in as much as the threat from the others is going to be dealt with. The threat from the dragons, and he does see this as a threat from the dragons, will be dealt with, and the people of Westeros will have to kind of pick up the pieces afterwards. That's the sort of the broad feel of the ending. I think the bit that I think it's pretty clear is going to be very, very different is the ending of the others, because we weren't told anything really about what they were wanting, the White Walkers on the TV show, what they're wanting, why they were there. They came up, they had a big battle, and then Arya killed the Night King, and that was it. That I'm pretty sure is not going to be how this ends in the TV show. I think there will be some degree of what I think they were hinting at in the TV show, of undoing the magic that has brought about the others in the first place. But it's not just let's have a big set piece battle at the end of which Arya's going to stab someone. Let's go to Class Ballerina. There's an SSM. This is So Spake Martin, which, if you've never come across this, incidentally, before I get into this one, if you've never come across this, George R. R. Martin has some dedicated fans who have done R'hllor's own service and tried to collate all the things that George R. R. Martin has said on the record, sometimes off the record, about A Song of Ice and Fire. So collected interviews, collected off-the-cuff comments when he went on to like message boards back in the day. All of that stuff is collated on So Spake Martin. So you can just Google it, and there's a whole load of things on there. Anyway, There's an SSM that says George R. R. Martin said Littlefinger understands Varys and his motives better than Varys understands Littlefinger's. Littlefinger shows no sign of knowing about Fagon, so what could he possibly be talking about? So hang on, let me work on this one thing. It says George R. Martin says Littlefinger understands Varys and his motivations better than Varys understands Littlefinger's. Littlefinger doesn't seem to know about Fagon, so what could he be talking about? So I mean, I don't think he's talking about specifics. If we're talking here about Varys and his motivations, I think what we're trying to say is that, or Littlefinger and his motivations. I think that Littlefinger understanding Varys means that Littlefinger understands that Varys is not loyal to the throne per se, but also he's not a threat in terms of him personally wanting to have the power. And I think is what Littlefinger understands. I'd have to see what it actually says, specifically what it says, to have something slightly more nuanced than this. Whereas in terms of understanding what Littlefinger understands, what Varys understands about Littlefinger is he does not get the nuance about well, two things. The a very high level Littlefinger wants he wants power for himself to climb the ladder, and also he wants cat, or if he can't have cat, he wants what's that? Can I always forget her name? Cat's daughter, Sansa. How always have a mind blank on one thing every single time. So if Varys does not understand that, then you could argue the case that this is more evidence that Varys is indeed a eunuch, and as a eunuch, therefore, perhaps he does not understand the depths of what has gone on with Littlefinger and his obsession with Cat and Sansa. So that would be my guess. I don't know that particular SSM, but that would be my guess. Michelle Ramo picking up a question for Constantine Tranos. Thank you. I love it when people do this, picking up questions for other people and sort of highlighting them in the chat for me. It's very, very kind. So thank you. Is Mace Tyrell really a fool? Or has Olenna taught him how to project himself as a fool in order to trick other people into not taking him seriously? Oh, it's a really good question. I think that he acts in a way which can be quite effective. The question is whether he does that on his own volition, or whether he is doing what he does because he's influenced to do it by Olenna or someone else in the Tyrells, and she wants to keep up, this idea that he's a bit of a bumbling fool. So the classic example is in Robert's Rebellion. The Tyrells have got the largest, just to be clear, the Tyrells have got the largest army in Westeros. Which side of this war they came out on was going to play a huge part in deciding who won that war. If they had been at the Battle of the Trident, probably the result had been the other way round. They weren't at the Battle of the Trident because they initially came in, took on Robert Baratheon's army, won the only victory against Robert Baratheon's army, but then Mace said, "No, we're not gonna follow up. We'll let him scurry off wherever he's going. That's fine. We're gonna go to Storm's End." And he marched his army and all of the navy, got the navy all the way round, and besieged Storm's End for a year. And what that meant, well, it looked like a thing that you can't really criticize him for, because this is Robert Baratheon's home, and he's besieging it, and he just hasn't managed to be victorious yet. So he couldn't really be criticized for it, for his loyalty to the Targaryens, to Aerys. But at the same time, he wasn't being remotely useful in that war. He was away from the action. He could have turned the tide of the war by being more involved. He decided not to. He decided to sit out the moment that Ned Stark turned up with his force. Then Mace Tyrell said, "Oh, you got me. We submit, and we're heading off home again now." And what that meant was that the Tyrells emerged almost completely unscathed from Robert's rebellion. Nobody could really blame them on either side, and they lost very few soldiers. Now, Olenna Tyrell has a couple of times she kind of mocks Mace Tyrell for that, about, oh, he was there, he was just having, picnics day after day, not actually doing anything, how ineffective it was. That was almost certainly, from her perspective, she knows why he was there. And the question is whether she told him to go there and take that position, or he decided to go there, and she is just wanting people to think this isn't some kind of clever political calculation. This is just him being a bit stupid and not realizing that he could have been more involved in the war and probably should have been more involved in the war. So that's where the uncertainty is. My instinct is he's not a tactical genius. He's not a political genius, but he's probably not as big a buffoon as he personally comes across as in his own mannerisms, and also others within his family, notably Olenna, try and play up. Because actually, if you stop and think, well, why would he do that? It's because actually they don't want. I said they've got the biggest army, and they are a very rich family. That they, during time of war, this is where the vast majority of the food is going to come from. They are incredibly important, and yet they're not particularly warlike, and they seem quite happy to be staying out of things. And so if they keep their heads down and people don't think that they're plotting, then they can probably get away with quite a lot. Let's go to Corvus Corax. Good evening, Robert. Good evening to you. Do you think Egg, this is Egg from Duncan Egg, King Aegon V, grows into madness, a dreamer, or a tragically hopeful researcher? I think all three. The the context for this is that the Egg that we know from Duncan Egg, he will grow up, he will become king, and at the end of his reign, we're told he became obsessed with trying to hatch dragon eggs. And he sent out for wisdom across the world, basically. He got some pyromancers in, he got some ancient knowledge from Ashai, and they tried to hatch these dragon eggs at Summerhall. Big explosion, lots of flames, lots of people die. Big tragedy. Was that the three options you've given us madness? Was that him being a dragon dreamer? Or was he just a very hopeful researcher? To say, I think it's all three. Maester Aemon said he had three brothers, and the dragon dreams killed all of them. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And one of those is Egg, which basically says that Egg must have started having visions about hatching dragon eggs in some way, and that was what hastened him to be trying to do that. So I think definitely he's a dragon dreamer. Madness, we this word is thrown around very casually for the Targaryens, but I think we've seen increasingly that uh, what the outside world sees as madness is often them getting a lot of these visions and prophecy and the things swirling around and then becoming uber focused in on doing that. So might he have gone mad? Well, a hyper focus in on hatching dragon eggs, probably a little bit crazy. Yeah. Just a hopeful researcher, probably a bit of that too. Richard Johnson saying thanks to the moderators and shout outs to the Well Told Tale. That's my other channel, which does I audio narrate classic science fiction and fantasy stories. If you're interested in that, do go and check it out. Who do you think will be the first Stark to return to Winterfell, and what effect may that have? Interesting. So let's run through them. Arya is a long way away, and is not, I think, going to return in this kind of first tranche of stocks going back there. Bran is also a long way away, and at the moment has no particular reason to return. At some point, he will, I'm pretty sure, but not yet. Sansa is stuck in the Vale. Littlefinger will take her up to the north at some point, but not immediately. The plan, as he has explained it to her, is to get her married to Harry the Heir, then reveal her true identity, then take an army from the Vale up to the north and claim it for her. That will take a little while to do. So really, we've got the two Starks who are in the north right now left. We've got Jon, if we're counting him as a Stark, and Rickon. Now, Davos has gone to try and find Rickon, Skagos is quite a long way away, but though the timelines aren't 100% clear, it does seem as if the Davos heading off thing, although it's the last we know of what he's done, that seems to have been a couple of months ago, before the events that we think of as the end of A Dance of Dragons. So he's probably got up to Skagos and is doing things. It's just that George R. R. Martin, all of the characters within each book, the POV characters have some kind of an arc within that book. And George R. R. Martin obviously thought, well, I'm going to end Davos's arc here when he's heading off, rather than partway through his mission. So I imagine we will get, probably quite early on, a Davos chapter or two to help his storyline catch up, his timeline catch up with the rest, if that makes sense. And as a result, he will probably come in. The Manderleys, their cunning plan is, they haven't said it in exactly these terms, but they are going to try and turn on gather loyal Northerners to turn on the Freys and turn on the Boltons, and they need to have a Stark figurehead for everybody to rally around. They can't just get rid of the Boltons and just all sit there in an empty Winterfell. They need somebody to say, here, boom, here's the Stark in Winterfell. And so instinctively, I think that Rickon will be the first to return. And whether he will survive very long is a different matter. Jon, however, will be hot on the heels. I'm pretty sure of that. He, obviously, the last we see of him is dying, so he needs to come back. But when he comes back, there is every indication, I think, that he will just go ahead with what he said he was going to do before he died, which is go to Winterfell. So those two are the two most likely. If I had to guess, it's Rickon slightly before Jon. Okay, let's go to Andrew K. Just talked about Egg, saying Egg was also desperate. his reforms were an uphill climb to enact, and even if mostly external factors, his reign was a bit of a mess despite good intentions. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I'd say a bit of a mess, but he certainly didn't manage to get the traction that he wanted. And it's entirely possible that he went through the thought process that a lot of Targaryens did, which is after the dragons had gone, they realized they needed to do, if they wanted to stay in power, they could no longer just stay in power because we've got dragons and you have to do what we say because we've got dragons. They used two things. First of all, being, they've got the army, they've got the instruments of the state behind them, the institutional power. But secondly, the soft power by marrying other families in, calling people in. So let's get Dawn in. Let's get Dawn married into the royal family. Let's get the Baratheons married into the royal family, and so on. Egg tried to get his children to do this and failed miserably at it. And so maybe his brain went in the same way that many other Targaryen brains went, was that, well, if only we had those dragons back, then people would do as I say. So yeah, he was driven by it as well, by the fact that his reforms weren't working as well as he hoped. Lady Pushkins, hi Robert. Game of Thrones question. Of all the books so far, which do you think is one of the most important or significant chapters, or a chapter or chapters? Interesting question. So, I mean, there's lots of different important chapters. The way, when I was thinking about this question a little bit earlier, the way I looked at this, though, was this story, we've got a starting point of book one. Obviously, we get the prologue, introduces existential threat to humanity with the others. That has to be important. That is the thing which pushes this all the way, because no matter what else is happening on the story, we know at some point the others have to be dealt with. The story cannot end until we've dealt with that. And then at the end of book one, last chapter, we have Dany and the dragons hatching. And at some point, that has to be dealt with, because the dragons are going to get bigger and more powerful, and either they're there and they're in charge because somebody with a dragon you can't really face, or the dragons have been dealt with and killed or whatever. So the opening and closing chapters of book one, I think, have to be there as some of the most important. But then I would say the other thing to look for is, and I started talking about this in a slightly different context in replying to an earlier question, the way that George R. R. Martin, intentionally or unintentionally, has structured the book, from one way of thinking, is kind of like this fanning out and then coming back. So the story expands and then it contracts back down. We saw the last two books that we had. That was the extent of the expansion. We got massive new areas of plotline, the Dornish plotline, the Iron Islanders plotline, the Fagon plotline, massive new stuff going on. And crucially, the main characters, if we can call them the main characters, their stories did not reach the apex for them, the point at which they then start coming back in. Now, we do have perhaps one that has, for example, Dany, and this is her really her last chapter in A Dance with Dragons. It's a mental shift for her. She's spent an entire book trying to peacefully rule Meereen and failing. And then we get this last chapter where she's out there, she's with Drogon's got a cave. She's calling the cave Dragonstone. She's seeing visions of people like Jorah telling her to go to Westeros, where she's getting Quaithe talking to her. The dragon, remember who you are, Daenerys. The dragons know. Do you? Um, and then she ends this. She sees the Dothraki coming in the distance, and she looks westwards, and the sky was a colour of a blood bruise, we read. And that is symbolically the moment where things have shifted for her. She had been trying to rule wisely and peacefully over Meereen, but now she's accepting she's going to go back to Westeros. She's going to do the fire and blood thing. Now, that's not just me speculating. George R. R. Martin has confirmed that. Look at the Meereenese blot. If you wish to Google this, the Meereenese blot blog did a series of essays setting out Dany's arc, and George R. R. Martin, back in the days when he sometimes did comment on this kind of stuff, said, yes, this guy gets it exactly. So that is, I think, one of the most important chapters. The Dany chapter right at the end of A Dance with Dragons, when the narrative tone shifts. We don't see it, we don't think of it as being a hinge point yet because we haven't seen what happens next. But after that, she is then going to be shifting down to a point where the visions we've seen from the House of the Undying, it appears that the Dosh Coleen, they're going to be bowing before her. She's maybe going to be leading the Dothraki. She's going to be going back to Meereen, setting off to go and take Westeros. This is the shift in direction for her. Jon similarly has perhaps the start of this pivot moment. We had the chapter where he decides, and whether this is the most important one or maybe the first chapter when he's back in Winds will be, but he makes the decision after all of books, 1 to 5, he is there basically committing to the Night's Watch. He's there defending the wall. He's there trying to gather the forces together to defend against the others. His sights have always been facing north. When we get to that last chapter for him in A Dance with Dragons, he gets the pink letter, his eyes turn south once more, and he says, right, I'm going to Winterfell. I'm going to sort out this mess. He'd been resisting it. Stannis had been trying to get him to go there. He'd been resisting it. And now he's shifted and he's going to go. That is his pivot moment. From this moment on, he's joined in with this army idea. I'm going to get the north sorted, and then we're going to be focusing in on the others. So those two characters, that's where their pivot moments are going to happen. Tyrion is nearly there. I have a feeling that his proper pivot moment, we spoke already, he was very much focused in on Westeros. His story in A Dance with the Dragons is him slowly, layers of himself are just sort of getting slowly ripped off, and he's now going to be finding something new to drive him, which is going to be a new role. Whether this is advisor to Dany, he's going to find the dragons that he's been dreaming about since he was a child. He's going to find new things to focus in on. So that's his pivot moment, and we're probably going to see that a few chapters into the Winds of Winter. Bran's, I spoke about it a little bit earlier in the stream. He's had this chapter where he is now being taught the magic. All of his story up to this point is taking him up to the furthest reaches, and a lot of these, when I'm talking about these pivot points, often they're in like far geographical points, and then the people are going to be coming back. For Bran, he's gone all the way up to Bloodraven's cave. Bloodraven has taught him now how to do the skin changing properly, how to use the weirwood trees, to be seeing through the weirwood trees. From this moment on, yeah, he might have another chapter or two of being trained, but his path is now set, and he is now, after 5 books of getting him there, he is now becoming what he was going to become. Okay, let's go to the chat. I think we've got a few questions that have come in. Rabbi OB saying tinfoil. Arya will be brought back to Westeros as a faceless man contact, only being revealed at the last minute to be Stoneheart, who will then give up her vengeance and in doing that her unlife. Okay, so she's going to be brought back to Westeros on a faceless man contract, which was to kill Lady Stoneheart. Okay. So somebody will have had to take out that contract to kill her. I do like. I mean, I'm open to this idea that Lady Stoneheart. What I want is for her to voluntarily be giving up her unlife because she finds her children are alive. But I'm also open to this idea of Arya doing a kind of a mercy killing on her. She is mercy. So that's entirely possible. But yeah, fun tinfoil. Thank you. Jay Shufflebosson saying, put on your tinfoil hat. Do you think that Euron warged into his crew at one time to go into Old Valyria to fetch things like his suit of armor? And when one would die, he would walk into another. Okay, so I do. I do wonder something's happened with Euron. He has clearly gone out and raided places and got lots of stuff, and we know certainly one big and valuable thing that he got, his barrel of Shade of the Evening juices. That was from raiding another ship. But he certainly seemed to have got a lot of things that are Valyrian based, or claimed to have. He certainly got Dragonbinder that we've seen. George R. R. Martin has gone to great pains to tell us quite how dangerous going to Old Valyria is now. He told us in The World of Ice and Fire. He gave us several examples of people who've gone in there when we got to Fire and Blood and didn't come back out. We got to Fire and Blood. We got the story of Aeria Targaryen and Balerion, who seem to have gone there. Again and again, we get stories of Uncle Geryon, the Tyrion's Uncle Geryon, who went off there and just don't return. So he's gone out of his way to tell us quite how dangerous this is. And for Euron to have apparently gone there and survived just adds to his mystique. Now, I don't think we're ever going to get a confirmation on this one way or another, because Euron likes the mystique. He likes the way that people would think, you did that, wow, maybe you are this kind of strange, superhuman, godlike figure, which is what he's wanting. So I don't think we're going to get to that. I do think that there's a fair chance that he does have some kind of skin-changing powers and some kind of magical powers. I think certainly he is, if not skin-changing into, then perhaps seeing through the eyes of the Dusky Woman, the gift that he gave to Victarion. And if he went to Old Valyria, he would not have gone himself. That much I think is pretty clear from his approach with Victarion. He's decided that he wants a dragon and he wants to marry Dany, but he doesn't go out himself. He gives Victarion this huge, dangerous horn to blow and tell him to go and bring back his bride for him. So, for all the talk of Euron doing all of these things, the biggest example we have is of him delegating something. And he also didn't blow the horn the first time. The person who did blow the horn died. So Euron is very calculating, but he's also very aware of the image that he puts across. And all of his crew, if you didn't know, he cut out the tongues of all of his crew so they cannot say what happened. So, yes, if he did go there, he definitely will have sent his crew out. That is 100% in line with what he's about. And if he's got skin-changing abilities, then that makes absolute sense. Nice ballerina. What do you think will happen to the wildling slaves from Hardhome? Never brought up again? Could Dany free them and get wildlings on her side, or something else? So, some wildlings were captured from Hardhome. This is so all of the wildlings went up to Hardhome. So all of the wildlings went up to Hardhome after we get the battle under the wall. The wildlings scattered. They lost. Stannis arrived. Maybe the wildlings would have won. Maybe they could eventually have breached the wall. Who knows? They were actually doing a reasonable job. Stannis's army arrives. They scatter. Some of them stay nearby, negotiate a little bit more with Jon, etc., and those ones managed to get it back in. Some of them went further afield. A large amount seem to have headed off to Hardhome, which is this place we talked about it, I think, on the last live stream. It's this the remains of what used to be the closest thing the wildlings had to a city. But then there was some massive explosion 600 years ago, I think it was, and weird things since then. Ghostly things, spectral things have been happening since then. But faced with an army that just routed them and the others, Hardhome seems like the least bad option for some of them. And they've gone off there, and some have been captured by slavers. I think there's a fair chance that they're never brought up again. Could Dany free them and get wildlings on her side? Possibly. The thing with Dany and her invasion coalition, which is what it is that far from this being what I think she probably has in her mind as being her returning as the rightful Westerosi ruler, this is going to look like all of the foreigners from different parts who've come to invade Westeros. It's going to have the Dothraki, it's going to have the Unsullied, it's going to have dragons that nobody's seen, it's going to have sellsword companies from Essos. It's going to have this strange coalition of all of these different people. Probably it's going to have a whole load of at least one Red Priest of R'hllor, quite possibly a whole load of others joining in. This is going to feel very foreign. So the idea of maybe picking up a few random wildlings as well, this is very much on brand. But probably nothing is the boring answer. Marty, how interested are you in rough drafts of the books? Redditor got hold of many and found some interesting stuff. For example, Hugh did poison Jon Arryn. Well, I mean, I don't have rough drafts of the books. I'm interested in stuff that George R. R. Martin has officially released in one way, shape, or form. I always have a slight. I mean, I'm fascinated by drafts. There are many interesting times. I mention it in a few videos when we do know various things. Like, for example, in the Sword Blackfire, George R. R. Martin read out a chapter I think at a convention when he was writing Dance with Dragons, and in that there is a mention of a sword, which was not in final version that went out, and I find fascinating that he clearly decided to remove that mention. Now, what can we learn from rough drafts? I think we sometimes overinterpret these things for the simple reason that we do not know. Without George R. R. Martin sitting beside us and pointing at things and explaining them, we do not know why certain things were changed, why certain things were taken out. And in particular, when we get drafts of things like The Winds of Winter, we do not know whether he's taken stuff out because he doesn't like it, and isn't going to do it, or he's taken stuff out because he wants to reveal it later, or in a different way. So I hesitate to place too much emphasis on drafts. They are drafts for a reason, because they're not what George R. R. Martin wanted for his final version. I still find them fascinating, obviously. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura. Great to see you. Saying just a show of love and support. You are the best. Well, thank you very much, Maura. You know your support hugely appreciates. So thank you very much indeed. And also saying for the mods and Dan, your handsome dog. Thank you very much. Yes, he has, as he usually does, taken himself off up to bed already. Robbie B just sending some mod love. Thank you very much for that. And did I have more in the chat? No, I think I might be caught up roughly. And let's go to a question from Andrew Biederman, saying, hello, Robert. How did Braavos stay hidden from the Valyrian freehold? At the same time, it was unfindable by dragon-riding flyers. It was also being found and populated by thousands of escaped slaves over a period of many years. Some kind of magic, perhaps, that kept it hidden somehow to those that shouldn't find it? Yeah, I have to admit, I've wondered this myself. So Braavos was founded by slaves who revolted. They were out on boats, they revolted, they took control of the boats from the Valyrian freehold, sailed them up the coast until they found what seemed to be a good place to hide, which was where Braavos is now. They founded a city. Now, the place they found to hide was a good place to hide, firstly because it's right up in the top left-hand corner of Essos, so out of the way. You're only really going that way if you're going to go around the outside and to go across the north coast of Essos, and there's not huge amounts up there nowadays. And or you're going to sort of like be heading off from there to somewhere in the very north of Westeros. So you're not likely to be passing it by just randomly. And secondly, it is fully enclosed. There's this is a lagoon basically, and around the outside there's this. I don't think they're specifically called mountains, but these big high hills with pines on the top of them, which hide the city from view. So you cannot see the city just from sailing along the coast. That's out of view. You can only see the city if you go in through. There's this one small gap, which now the Titan of Braavos is standing over. But that's the only way in or out. And then the final reason why this was a good hiding place was that it's the weather up there, very foggy, and there's often this thick layer of mist over the whole lagoon. So Valyrians who were looking for this place, and they did start getting a bit annoyed because they'd heard of it. It was known as the Secret City. It started to grow. People knew about it. They'd taken a very strong stance against slavery for obvious reasons, and the Valyrians kept slaves. So they were kind of looking for it, but when they were flying their dragons over, they couldn't find it anywhere. But how do you hide a city realistically? So I think that there are two answers to this, which is probably a bit of both. First, you ask, is there some kind of magical hiding magic? I think probably there must have been something. We're told that they were guided to that spot by some spell singers, I think it was. In Braavos, although we think of it as being this very kind of commercial place, we get the Braavos, we get the Faceless Men, etc. That kind of thing, the Iron Bank. If you look at the map of it, right in the middle, you've got this whole series of islands, the Isle of the Gods, which is just devoted to temples of every imaginable faith and religion there is. And these people were devoted to their new city and keeping it safe. And so if you have all of these priests and you've already said that it was through the magic of some of these priests that you managed to find this place in the first place, then yes, you could imagine that there probably was some kind of protective magic going up. We're not told that. There's no particular hint of it other than the mystery of how on earth did it manage to stay so secret for so long, because it did for a long time. But I think probably that's the first thing. And the second thing that has to be said is that clearly no one told the Valyrians, which sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but the Valyrian society was very stratified. It's very structured. Uh, the the Dragon Riders were just the top 40 families. That's just 40 families with their dragons. Below that, you'd got other Valyrians, but who weren't dragon riders. So, for example, the House Velaryon, they were on that seemingly that second tier. Then you probably had another layer, and then you had the slave workers, and the people who were doing the hunting for this place would have been those 40 families, which means that there actually wasn't that many of them, and how they were traveling around was on dragons. But they, in their travels, and they didn't ever often travel away from Valyria, they were actually quite insular. Then they obviously never came across some random sailor who said, "Oh yeah, I've been to Braavos. I'll tell you where it is." People did not tell them. So I think that's the second thing, is that people actually liked the fact that there was this city that was standing up against the Valyrians, who were, let's face it, unquestionably the power in all of that land. So yes, probably some magic, but also probably this is just evidence that people didn't like the Valyrians all that much. Let's go to. Did I have one more question? Yeah, and Andrew K just pointing out George R. R. Martin doesn't necessarily just do drafts so much as always tweaking and revising. Yeah, I mean that's certainly a very valid point. Is that George R. R. Martin's writing style means that he goes back and revisits things a lot. So it's not like here's a rough draft, here's a near final draft that I just need to do some edits on, here's the final draft. He will get up to his final draft, put that in a drawer with the rest of his manuscript, and then 5 years later come back and go, actually, I'm going to start again on this one because 20 chapters later, I'm going to say such and such a thing, which means that this character actually needs to have gone there, not there. And then he'll rewrite it. So, yeah, it's a much more iterative process than we might sometimes think. Roman Lakovets, given that the Freys are sworn to House Tully, couldn't Catelyn simply command Lord Walder to let Robb's host through the twins instead of agreeing to his demands? Theoretically, but she was not in House Tully. She was a Stark now. She had changed. So although obviously everyone knows that she was born in the Tullys, she was there on behalf of the Starks. And at the time, then the Tullys were in quite a bad way geopolitically, it has to be said. They were being besieged in Riverrun. The Lannisters had been going across the Riverlands and been burning down villages and farms and destroying huge amounts of lands. The Riverlands were a mess. So the Tullys weren't really in a strong position at the time. And Walder Frey knew that he was. So could she have gone in there and just sort of said, look, Walder, you'll do this now because otherwise the whatever, the Tullys will come down hard on you. She could have done that, but at the same time, he would have then said, well, okay, I will just shut my gates and nobody's coming across here. And that would have completely changed the outcome of the war, and probably River Run would have been lost. So they wouldn't have been able to do it. So he basically knew that the strength of his position, and he was willing to um, uh, leverage it for as much as he could. It's probably fair to say that this will have factored into his mind when the Red Wedding happened, and he's deciding which way is he going to go. I've got a question about this in a moment, actually, but he's decided which way is he going to go. Is he going to stick with Robb Stark, or is he going to move over to support the Lannisters? The idea that he's not in House Tully's good books and he's not in the Stark's good books will have played a little part in that as well, I'm sure. He will have thought to himself, well, it's not as if they really like me anymore. They feel that I've been extracting everything I can from them. They're not exactly about to shower me with lots of gifts. Roman Lukovitz saying, to be fair, she used her status as a Tully to arrest Tyrion. She did, but it wasn't as a Tully. It was with the love that you have for the loyalty you have for my family. If that makes sense. Now, there was also, in a world which was not at war, when the Tullys were just down the road, that was a very different situation than a world that was at war, and the Tullys couldn't even leave their castle. So that's a very different power dynamic going on. Let's go to a question from Scott Bittner saying, hello, Robert. I hope this message finds you and Dan the dog well. It does. Thank you. My question is, with Gregor Clegane seemingly, at least publicly, claimed to be dead with no apparent heirs, does his keep stand without ownership? Are there any other small keeps or castles owned by landed knights that are now dead because of the war? If you were king at this point in the story, who would you grant Clegane's keep or other similarly unknown unowned lands to? We make many interesting knights throughout the story with small roles. Which would you raise up to a landed title? Thank you for creating this fun space for us to discuss goofy stuff like this. Okay, well, this is the perfect thing that I always love. Some things in the chat. Let me know. I'll read out a few of these. Who would you, in this story, grant them a nice little keep or something like that? I mean, just the first thing I think to say. So, in the normal course of events, that is in the gift of the Lord Paramount of that region. So it was House Lannister who gave that keep and its land to the newly formed House Clegane. And it would therefore be in their gift. In the normal course of events, it would be in their gift. Now, obviously, the king can always overrule, and they can decide to do this, and they can go over the heads of the Lords Paramount, but most of the time they didn't. Because most of the time the crown let the Lords Protector of a region run their region, and they didn't want to annoy them too much because their power rested on the power and authority that they had. So that's, I think, the first thing to be said. The second thing is that, yes, as far as we know, that's it for House Clegane, in as much as Gregor Clegane is officially dead. As far as we know, he didn't have any children. They had one sister who was dead. And Sandor Clegane, according to the current occupant of the Iron Throne, probably not Flavour of the Month, and therefore would not inherit. And is also believed to be dead. But within that, I think this is something I often say, because I think it's always worth saying, is that there is always an heir, if you want there to be an heir. This is one of those kinds of things that the house line came to an end is that, okay, you can say it came to an end if you want to. That's absolutely fine. If you've drawn the line and said that's it, but it's entirely within uh, the whim of the king to sort of say, well, okay, who should be next in line? Them. I'll now name them. I'll give them that name, and they can inherit. When you get, probably the clearest example of this is you get Robb Stark deciding his will, and he's talking to Cat, his mother, and he says, "I need a will because I might die. I fought in quite a few battles. Let's just be honest, realistically," and he was right. But I need to have a will for who's going to be after me. It used to be quite clear. It used to be Bran was going to inherit after me, and after him, Rickon. But he thinks they're both dead, and uh, I don't want to leave it to Sansa because Sansa's married to the Lannisters, and so the Lannisters would inherit, and I don't want that. And Arya has gone missing. Nobody's seen her for a couple of years. She's probably dead. So I need to have an heir. And he then says, I want it to be Jon Snow. I want to legitimize him and him be my heir. Cat doesn't want that for a variety of reasons. And she then goes off on this like very random kind of, oh, but there you do have other relations. It's not the end of the Starks. We can leave it to someone else. And she goes, so your father's father had a sister whose daughters married such and such a house in the Royces. I'm kind of making this up, but it was like this. You know, he married House Royce, and then they had two children, and one of them married somebody else. I can't remember the name of that house, but they definitely are there somewhere in there. And she's kind of just scratching her head. Who should be next in line? Even if all of the Starks had gone, there's always somebody who's next closest on the family tree. If you go high enough in the family tree and come back down another branch, there will always be somebody else. Similarly with the Cleganes, although we think of the Clegane family tree as just being, those three or four people that we know of, there will be others. Their father had a father who probably had brothers and sisters who had children, and so they perhaps are technically the next in line. So all of that said, who, if you are giving out some, and there will be some of these kind of like abandoned small castles around somewhere, or landed areas. Who in the story would you give a little bit of land to and a little bit of title? My the people I like. Say the people I like. So you were sort of asking interesting knights with small roles who could raise up to a landed title. I mean, I'd love to give Brienne some kind of landed title. I'd love to give Arya Hutar a landed title. I think he deserves it. Podrick, I think, would work well. But let's have a little look. Michelle Ramos says Pod. Uh, Rod Dammit saying give Podrick a keep. Well, Pod seems to be the popular choice here. Yeah, so there we go. If you've got any more questions, drop them into the chat. Oh, any more questions? Well, if you have any more questions, drop them into the chat. I've got a few more questions I can be going through in the time being. But let's go to Adam Geets saying, hi, Robert and Dan. A Song of Ice and Fire question. Given how George R. R. Martin loves giving detailed descriptions of characters, do you think his lack of a description of any Hightower in his books means something for the rest of the series? If not, maybe it's another question he wants to leave open for everyone to talk about. Well, this is fascinating. If you've not noticed this, we don't have much by way of detailed physical descriptions of the Hightowers, which is a bit odd, and not very odd, for the simple reason that in the narrative we've only actually met one Hightower, Allery Hightower, who's married to Mace, I think, Tyrell, and but we don't get very clear physical descriptions of other high towers. Given how keen he is on establishing a clear identity for houses, the Starks have got grey eyes and long faces and often brownish or dark hair. The Valyrians, the purple-blue eyes, the silver-gold hair, the Lannisters with their golden hair. The fact that these houses have very clear and distinct looks should imply that a house as important as the Hightowers, who, although not Lords Paramount, they are the oldest house, George R. R. Martin has said, the oldest house in Westeros, and clearly one of the most important and influential houses. Surely their look should be quite important. Now, just to sort of pick at the threads of this a little bit, I think he has given us some hints here. We do have, so we've got Allery Hightower, who I've talked about already. We're told that she has silver hair, which perhaps is just because she's getting old. Fair enough. But then we also get Lyness Hightower, who was, if you remember the backstory for Ser Jorah, he fell in love with Lyness Hightower. He won a tourney. He was the glamorous knight. She married him. He took her up to Bear Island. She broke his heart. There's more to it, but that's the story. He when he sees Dany, he tells her that she looks a bit like her. So some hint of the Valyrian looks going on there, perhaps. Gerald Hightower, who was one of those 3 Kingsguard knights at the Tower of Joy. We're not given a physical description, but we're told that his name was the White Bull, which is an interesting description, interesting kind of nickname, because it implies, so bull probably implies some kind of physically big and imposing kind of person, but also white. What might that be? Did he have white hair? It's possible. And then finally, we have Alicent, who we're not told exactly what she's looked like. We're told that she was slender and she was graceful even into her older age. But we're also told that when King Jaehaerys got old and Alicent was there reading to him and things like that, he often confused her for Sarah, who we were talking about a little ago, Sarah Targaryen, which might just be Jaehaerys being old and mixing people up in his mind. Or it might be that Alicent had a look of silvery hair, perhaps a hint of Targaryen to them. So we don't have a clear description for what the Hightowers look like, but the hints we have seem to suggest perhaps white or silvery hair, which shouldn't come as too big a surprise, I think, because they are a very old family, the oldest family in Westeros. One of the other really old families in Westeros, House Dane, who similarly they're like the next big inlet inn on the south coast of Westeros, House Dane on Starfall, and again very similar kind of feel. The High Tower is on an island. Starfall is an island in the kind of the estuary of this river, which sort of comes from inland. Same as we have with Old Town. They are quite similar, and they seem to have come across from Essos and set up base there and just kind of stayed there forever. And we know that House Dane, their features can quite often come across as quite Valyrian-ish. Some have this kind of silver hair, some have blue eyes. George R. R. Martin has confirmed that this doesn't mean that they're Valyrian. You can have more than one sort of ethnic group or a subset of an ethnic group who have quite similar features, but they just happen to come from slightly different places. So if I had to guess, it is an interesting thing because we don't have the details here, but if I had to guess, the Hightowers probably look quite similar to House Dane. That just instinctively feels right to me. And the features they have probably feel a bit Valyrian, but not completely. Okay, so Michelle Ramos saying, enter Great Empire of the Dawn theory. Yeah, absolutely. The idea that these very early families landing on Westeros come from over there definitely does kind of make sense. Right, we've got a question from Stephen saying, hi, Robert. I hope you are well. I am, thank you. Regarding your recent video on the Valonqar, I want to suggest a tinfoil candidate, Ben Plum, commander of the Second Sons. After all, another name for Second Son is Little Brother. And thanks to Tyrion, House Lannister now owes him and his company a big debt that I doubt Cersei would be inclined to honour. Perhaps if Tyrion stays with Dany and Meereen, the Second Sons could make their way to Westeros and offer their services to Cersei. She might like the idea, since Vagon has the Golden Company and her father had the Brave Companions. Why not hire her own Essos company? Then, at a time when she is vulnerable, Plum could pull out Tyrion's promissory notes, and you can probably imagine what happens next. And an unlikely scenario, but I rather like the idea that Tyrion unknowingly signed Cersei's death warrant with all those pages. Yeah, so I would agree with you. I think it's an unlikely scenario for the simple reason that Ben Plum seems a reasonably sensible person who understands the Geer. And incidentally, Ben Plum very likely to be Westerosi. Plum is and there's another famous Plum we have actually in the Duncan Egg stories, but he's related across to Westeros. It's not like he's some kind of, he doesn't understand how Westeros works at all. He does. He knows Westeros. But Ben Plum, in order to agree to free Tyrion, Tyrion signed off this series of promissory notes. He's outside Meereen. War's about to start. Tyrion signs off this series of promissory notes that says, look, I'm obviously not there right now, but I believe I'm the rightful heir to Casterly Rock. And when I get back to Casterly Rock and have claimed my own, you can have all of this gold. You can have all of this gold signed by me. Here you go. Here you go. He was handing them out all over the place. Now, if Ben Plum did go over there, I think he would realize quite quickly what Cersei's attitude towards Tyrion would be, and therefore would not try and extort anything out of her based on a promissory note from Tyrion. I think that he would most likely hang out, stay with Tyrion and stay close to Tyrion, knowing that Tyrion is going to be, or discovering that Tyrion is going to be heading west and then join up with Dany. So I think this is going to be a sellsword company that comes with Dany from this great sort of invading force, the coalition that she's pulling together, and we'll go over with him. So yeah, I always appreciate tinfoil, but I would agree with you that it's probably not what's going to happen. Let's go to April May saying little sibling, sister or brother. This, if you've not watched my Valonqar video, I would encourage you either to do it, watch my videos, but check what I included in there. Something you can check for yourself. David Peterson, who is the guy who invented and sorry, April May, you just reminded me of something, which is why I read out your thing there. he was the guy who invented High Valyrian for the TV show, and he had 7 words. George R. R. Martin has only come up with 7 words of High Valyrian. The rest of it is David Peterson, and it was put to him the idea that the way that Maester Aemon, in an unrelated thing, talks about the prince that was promised and says, oh, it could be a princess that was promised. It was put to him that this shows that High Valyrian, was a lot more fluid in terms of the, and I'm linguists, I apologize for the language here that I'm going to be using. I'm probably going to use the wrong terms, but the sort of the gender of words. So, for example, in some languages, French, German, whatever, you have some words which are masculine, some words which are feminine. He said this does not prove that at all. In applying this to the word Valonqar, there is no implication in his mind that what Maester Aemon was saying in that section about the prince that was promised, possibly also being the princess that was promised, implies that Valonqar could be little sister as well as little brother. He says, no, this means little brother. In fact, he's made up a word for what little sister would be. So he is very clear in his mind that there are the equivalent of the prince that was promised for English speakers is something like the word scientist, which is gender neutral. You can't tell just by saying this person is a scientist. You can't tell whether this is, any gender. That doesn't. It's not clear. It's entirely neutral, that word, and that is what. But you often, back through history, you might have interpreted that and saying, 50 years ago, you would say the vast majority of scientists are men, therefore I'm going to assume it's a man. That's what Maester Aemon was saying. We assume that this must be a man, but not necessarily, because that's a gender-neutral word. But the fact that that is a gender-neutral word does not mean that Valonqar was a gender-neutral word. I hope that makes sense. Do go and watch that video. If it doesn't, as I say, I bow to the linguists, and the person who understands that language better than anyone is very clearly of that opinion. Rural Jora, thank you so much for the super sticker. And Michelle Ramos saying Haydar is little sister. Yeah, he cares. So that's the word that he's come up with for there. And April May saying, but for Cersei, I think she may be right. It's Tyrion because she made it happen. I could easily get distracted into the who's the Valonqar thing here. But yeah, she thinks it's Tyrion, and that is the most important point here. Whoever it ends up being who kills Cersei, which is basically what we're trying to find here, whoever it ends up being, the fact that she thinks it's Tyrion is what is driving the action right now. Okay, so let's go to Lord Medici. So saying, was the purple wedding actually a good deal for Elena? She is actually the one who pours the poison into the wine, whereas Baelish stays safely away from the scene. His main contribution is smuggling the poison into the party in Sansa's hairnet. But this actually forces Elena to take the extra risk of removing it without anyone noticing. It seems like it would have been easier for Elena to just take it in her pocket. Littlefinger also organised the dwarf spectacle to force a confrontation between Tyrion and Joffrey, but one would think that the Tyrells, being the bride's family, could also have done this. In fact, it was probably to be expected for them to have a role in the party's organisation. We're invited to think of Elena as on a par with Tywin as a player of the game, but it seems to me like she could have organised the purple wedding with greater ease without Littlefinger. So I understand the point you're making. I think we need to just be clear what Littlefinger brings to the party here is that he gets the setup, he does the hard work, he manages to get the poison, and so if anyone who traces back this poison in some way, he or his people would be the people who would be found for this. Um, he is the person who knows exactly what it is that would get Tyrion angry with Joffrey, and therefore setting him up as a scapegoat. He's also getting Sansa out as part of this, which adds to the suspicion. So he is creating, he's doing the nefarious work in the background in order to get the things needed for this to happen, and he's setting up the patsy, as it were. He's setting up the person that's going to get blamed for this. What Elena is doing is actually, compared to all of that, quite simple and straightforward. So it's a good deal for her in that sense, and he gets what he wants out of it. The if you want to know, I sometimes do this, is say this isn't going to turn into a video overnight, but at some point there will be a video. My brain is at the back of my brain working through this. I think I mentioned this a couple of live streams ago. This question of Tywin and his response to what happened, because he doesn't seem that bothered. He also, at some point, seems, when talking to Tyrion before this, he seemed to fully accept and agree that Joffrey's not that good. He's not exactly who you'd want on the throne. If you're Tywin, who's wanting to be really ruling, he doesn't want Joffrey to be there. Tommen would be much better. So, working through I'm not suggesting he was in on this plot at all, but might he have had a hint of it? And if he did or didn't, was he okay with it? What extent would he allow it to happen? So interesting. We'll work on that. As I work on that one in the background. Expect a video at some point on that. Let's go to the Bazman, saying, "Hi, Robert. Hi. How much do we know about Ned Stark's mother? We get told about his father and what he was like, but I can't recall anyone ever talking about his mother." We don't know much at all. So I mentioned SSM, So Spake Martin, earlier, where people have collected George R. Martin's comments about various things. Someone did ask him once, I don't know what the context was, I think it was just like somebody sent him an email and he, with a few random questions, and got some answers from George R. Martin. And one of the questions was, who was Ned Stark's mother? What happened to her? And he gave the really unhelpful reply, Lady Stark, she died. And that's what we have. So George R. R. Martin, I think it's probably fair to say that to start with, he had not worked this up much. We have since then, we've got a few extra little bits of information in The World of Ice and Fire and the like. Her name was Lyanna Stark, Lyarra, and she was actually first cousin once removed from Rickard, the man that she married. So it's like she's one generation different, but only like you only go up one notch on the family tree. By implication, she must have died at some point in the few years between Benjen being born and the start of the story as we know it, the tourney at Harrenhal, because she definitely wasn't around at the tourney at Harrenhal. We're not told about her then at all. Benjen at the tourney at Harrenhal was about 13. So at some point in that period, she died. What else we know? We know that she was the daughter of Roderick Stark, who was, I think he was known as the Wandering Wolf, and Arya Flint. And the Flints are one of those northern clan families, so she will have probably been quite a strong independent woman, but you know what I mean. And Ned clearly named one of his daughters after this woman, who was his grandmother. So she seems to have been very likely to have been quite a strong character, but we don't know any real details other than that. Let's go. Karim, hi. Thank you very much for the compliment in the chat. Lord Medici saying, hello, Robert. Putting aside the grudges that Walder Frey might have had to betraying the Starks in favour of the Lannisters, wasn't Robb Stark's second offer preferable to Tywin's? This is the after Robb Stark married. Oopsie, I broke my promise to you. Walder Frey, he came back in and he basically had to have an offer to get Walder Frey back on side. So anyway, here we go. So both the Lord Medici says both the Tywin and Robb's offers were of a castle. The former offered Riverrun, whereas the latter offered Harrenhal. Riverrun's foremost attractive trait is being the capital of the Riverlands and thus granting its holder rulership over them. But that was not offered to Walter because Peter Baelish had already been, or Walder, sorry, Peter Baelish had already been named Lord Paramount. Harrenhal, on the other hand, is strategically placed and is the largest castle in Westeros. So as far as castles are concerned, Robb's offer seems better than Tywin's. In addition to this, Robb offered the phrase marriage into the ruling family in the Riverlands, the Tullys, and no such offers of social escalation were offered by Tywin. Would you agree with the claim that Robb's offer was better? If so, wouldn't this mean that by going for the less favourable but most vengeful option, Walder is not a cold-hearted pragmatist, but rather a grudge-driven, non-utility maximizer? So, interesting way of looking at this. In that, is the choice that Walder Frey made actually an indication that the reason why he did the Red Wedding was actually just out of vengeance, and not because he thought he'd get a better deal from Tywin? Personally, I think no, I don't think it says that. I think what the although yes, you could argue, I think either way about the castles. If you under what Robb offered, the Freys are still playing second fiddle in the Riverlands, whereas under what the Lannisters were offering, then yes, Littlefinger was technically Lord Paramount, but he didn't have the resources there with, although he's very rich, to immediately be the most powerful family in the Riverlands. So I think you can balance those two in terms of what they got there for castles. I think you can balance it, but I think you more have to stop and think about the geopolitical situation at the time. Now, when Robb and co arrived for what became the Red Wedding, they were heading north with their tails between their legs. They had they won a whole load of battles against the Lannisters, but they had failed in their strategy to get Tywin to abandon his post protecting King's Landing and head off into the Westerlands. That was what Robb was trying to do, and there are various reasons for this. Edmure Tully stopping the Tywin from getting a toehold crossing over the river was one of the reasons, not the only reason, but that was one of the reasons. But because Tywin was there, and they forged that alliance with the Tyrells, and Renly and his army had disappeared and gone. Stannis had been defeated at the Battle of the Blackwater, and then Upton left Dragonstone. Suddenly, the Lannisters were in a very strong position in the south. They had they were surrounded by enemies, but now they weren't. They had the largest army with the Tyrells backing them as well. The imminent threat of King's Landing falling had gone away. Stannis had been defeated. So suddenly the Lannisters were in the ascendancy. And Robb suddenly was faced with the fact that Winterfell had fallen. He'd pulled his forces out from the north. He'd left some up there, obviously, but the bulk of his forces he pulled out of the north to go and launch this campaign in the south, south of the Neck. Winterfell had fallen. The Iron Men were raiding up and down the west coast, and they'd claimed Moat Cailin, blocking off access to the north. This was not looking good for the Starks. Their strength in the south was gone. They had to head north. Winter was coming. Everyone knew winter would be coming, and therefore, almost certainly, by the time Robb Stark, even if everything went perfectly, by the time Robb Stark got all the way up to Winterfell and managed to defeat the opposition and reclaim his homeland, winter would have come, and all the thoughts of the campaign in the south would have had to be abandoned for a while. So that was the situation. And then Walder Frey had to ask himself, what do I want to be? With this weak North, weak Starks, strong Lannisters, do I want to tie myself into the Starks, knowing that the Lannisters will then come for me? Or do I tie myself into the Lannisters, and it's not just him, don't forget it's the Boltons, and he has married in, so one of his daughters had married Roose Bolton, so he's now married into the new royal family or Lord Paramount family of the north, and also he gets Riverrun and marries in with the Lannisters, the royal family. There, he'd already got a Frey married into to the Lannisters. So the geopolitical situation was that he would be in a much stronger position siding with the Lannisters than the Starks at that moment in time. Even if maybe he might have wanted a slightly different castle out of it, his position was well advanced. Let's go to Michael Trainer saying, imagine you're the lord of a major house in the Riverlands, closer to King's Landing than Riverrun. Envoys from Lannister, Baratheon, and Targaryen arrive and ask you to pledge fealty. To whom do you bend the knee? Well, in the Riverlands, I mean, I think it depends on where you're at, doesn't it? Where you're at in the story. But if the Targaryens are the ruling family, then you have to bend the knee to the Targaryens, particularly if they have dragons. The Baratheons are a long way away, and the Lannisters might be very rich, but the Lannisters they're in the Westerlands. So let's go to question from Martin S saying, I was thinking that something might have inspired the crown for a king moment in Game of Thrones, where Viserys meets his end. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the Roman imperator who crushed the Spartacus rebellion in 71 BC, later led a disastrous military campaign against the Parthian Empire in 53 BC. According to one possibly apocryphal account, the Parthians executed him by pouring molten gold down his throat, symbolizing his legendary greed. What do you think? Could this legend have influenced the crown for a king scene? There are clear thematic parallels, though one difference is that Crassus wasn't from a royal lineage, unlike Viserys. So, I mean, I think the answer is yes. Here, I've not heard George R. R. Martin specifically name check this, but it is he's a history nerd, and so he will know about this, and he will definitely have got some inspiration. I'm pretty sure on that. And Keith, this is my last ish Song of Ice and Fire one. I've got various more questions, a lot of things, and other things coming up. Do not worry. But keep on dropping questions in the chat. I'll pick up on them as well. Keith Boynton saying, hi, Robert. Thanks for the wonderful content. Well, thank you. I'm curious, have you read any of George R. R. Martin's non-Song of Ice and Fire writing? If so, is there anything you especially recommend or anything you're especially curious to check out? Well, I meant to have a copy of it here. I don't have it, but I do love Fever Dream. If you've, it's completely different to A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's vampires in the deep south on steamboats, on paddle boats, and it's wonderful. It's a very different feel and style of story, but it was my first encounter, well before I read A Song of Ice and Fire. It's my first encounter with George R. R. Martin, and I think it's a fantastic story. I've also read a couple more. The Ice Dragon is really good. One thing I've never read is the Aces. I think it's called Aces Wild, which he edits the series. I'm intrigued. At some point, I will get around to that. Talking of books, though, stay here. One thing. This is a book nerd corner, just for one moment. If you're not a book nerd, feel free to skip forward a bit. I got sent this. I know that very rarely I suddenly get these things which doing this makes it all seem worthwhile in terms of I got a freebie from the Folio Society, which is a new Fire and Blood, and I just thought you would like to see this. So this is a hardback, beautiful book. With some new original pictures in it, like here we go, that kind of thing. I've literally no idea whether I now need to put something to say that this is a sponsored post, because they haven't given me any money to say anything nice about this, but they did give me the book, and I just thought you'd like to see it because it is. Look at this; it's got this nice hardback thing. And if I ever get things like that, then I will very happily share it with you because it's pretty amazing. So anyway, that's I've not got any links to it, so I just thought you'd like to see it. Anyway, Andrew K saying very nice. Maybe show a little bit more. Okay, I will show you. I'll see. So we've got this beautiful thing here, but I'll show you another picture. Let's see if I can find another picture. There's I would say about half a dozen pictures. Oh, here we go. Who do you think this is? Rhaenyra. But we've got one more picture. Let's see if we can find one more picture. We'll turn to the questions in just one moment. But oh yeah, here we go. Look at that one. Beauty. It's a lovely, lovely book. And Folio Society just generally, um, if you're a book lover, they've just produced amazing things. Anyway, sorry, a bit of um, uh, distraction. Let's go. Oh, somebody in Reflective Rambling has done a link to the Folio Society. There we go. It's in the chat. Lord of the Rings questions. Let's do a few here. Kelly Summers saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you're doing well this evening with minimal tech issues. I think I've got away without any tech issues at all today, which is rare for me, but I'm fingers crossed." What was the nature of dragons in Middle-earth? If they're corruptions or mockeries of something like great eagles, it seems surprising that the first dragons couldn't fly. The scale of Ancalagon is pretty far beyond what the eagles have. Thorondor, the biggest eagle we know of, is certainly massive, but Ancalagon was large enough to hit 3 mountain peaks at the same time. The abilities of dragon like Glaurung also seem more in line with what you might expect from Maiar. So they probably can't be actual Maiar themselves since they're born and mature in Middle-earth, but what about offspring of Maiar with some kind of creature? So I think the nature of dragons. First of all, I will read the first mention in the Silmarillion we get of dragons is this. This is in the First Age. Morgoth perceived now that the orcs unaided were no match for the Noldor elves who've come back now into Middle-earth and were besieging his castle. His stronghold. So he sought in his heart for new counsel. Again, after 100 years, Glaurung, the first of the fire drakes of the north, issued from Angban's gates by night. He was yet young and scarce half grown, for long and slow is the life of dragons, but the elves fled before him. And basically, Morgoth's a little bit angry because he comes out, he's not fully grown, he's not fully armored. Everyone's seen this dragon that he's been growing. Glaurung comes back indoors, hangs around for a bit, grows a bit more, and then comes out again later in the story. But this first dragon didn't have wings. Now, in terms of what they are, they're often talked about as being like a mockery of the giant eagles, which I think is possibly true. Glaurung seems to have been like a first attempt without the wings. And then later ones, Ancalagon, you mentioned, massive eagle with wings. And from then on, they had wings. So I think they still can be a mockery of eagles. It's just we first see Ancalagon. We first see Glaurung appearing here as just a work in progress. As for what they are, we're not told. And my recent read through of Tolkien's letters has really kind of underlined for me how much Tolkien angsted about this kind of stuff. He would have angsted about this if he thought about it, and I'm sure he did think about it. He went through several iterations of what orcs actually are. Not because he just wanted to make them cooler or better or fit more into his story, but because he was concerned about their soul. It was like, well, so they can't have been created just by Morgoth, because Morgoth can't create anything, out of nothing. So he must have started with something else. But does this mean they're elves who are corrupted, or if are they like something inanimate that he sort of like managed to teach to talk in some way? If so, does that mean that are they natural all evil? And they said, no, I don't believe that they could do it. And he just went through this again and again. How do I get to a position that I can feel I can understand what happens with the orc soul? The same thing would have happened with dragons. This much I know. I like this thinking. Maybe there was some kind of Maya in the same way that some of the thinking with orcs was that they were corrupted elves. The idea they could be corrupted Maya is an interesting one. But it's not something Tolkien actually went into huge amounts of detail about. And Callie Summers also saying, I'm not sure if this is tinfoil or something I've just forgotten, but when Morgoth stole the Silmarils, Feanor said he couldn't replicate them. Silmarils, these three beautiful gems, captured the last light of the trees of Valinor. Fëanor says he couldn't replicate them because he had put so much of himself into their creation. Fair enough. But couldn't he simply explain the process to someone like Aula? Whatever magic and skill Fëanor had surely couldn't exceed the demigod who crafted a new species in his spare time. And especially at that crisis point, Galadriel might have been willing to give Aula some hair if he needed it. I know the Doylist answer is that there wouldn't be much of a story if they could solve the problem that easily, but is there a stated reason in the books? The implicit, if they could have, they would have, but they didn't, so they couldn't, is a little unsatisfying for such a pivotal moment. Yeah, absolutely. So the setup here is Morgoth had they'd captured him and he'd been basically in prison for a long, long time. He got released and basically promised to be a very good person from then on, but obviously he wasn't. And he went back to his bad ways, but the way he did it was just this catching everyone by surprise. He destroyed the two trees of Valinor, which they provided the light, and the light was not just normal light, but it's this kind of source of holy good light. And he also took with him the Silmarils, which were these three jewels that Fëanor, the greatest thing that Fëanor, the master craftsman, had created, which, among other things, captured the light of the two trees of Valinor in them. And this was important because that was now the last light of the two trees of Valinor. And the Valar say, well, maybe we could remake the trees, but we need a bit of that light, so we'll need the Silmarils. Can you give us the Silmarils? And then Fëanor's, no, I can't. He finds out in just a few moments' time. He finds out actually they've gone, they've been stolen. But he's like, no, I poured everything that I had into these. I can't remake them. And the implication here is that Fëanor had been overwhelmed, as we see what happens later, by this obsession with the Silmarils. He was jealous of the idea anyone else might have them. If he didn't have them on his person, he wanted them locked up in his house. He did not wish to give up the secrets of how to make these. And he knew that what would happen is that if he did hand over the Silmarils, they would break them open, basically, and everything he'd done would be lost. And sure, they might be able to give him some other Silmarils that look just the same, but someone else had made them. It wouldn't be the same. This wouldn't be his masterpiece. It's the equivalent of somebody who's spent, if you imagine you've spent years slaving over this work of art that you've created, you've put everything into it, and you know you could never reproduce anything quite that beautiful again. And then you get told, we need that, we're going to destroy it, but we'll give you something of equal value back. You don't want the something of equal value. You want the thing that you've created. So that's the idea. Is this isn't a logical working through from Fëanor. He's emotionally involved in this. Chaos Ballerina, can all Maiar force people under their will as Sauron does with the ring? Almost seems to be able to do with the sea longing. What are the implications of this? So Ulmo he's a Valar, so he's sort of next tier up. What Sauron did with the ring was pretty impressive, and he poured so much of himself into that that when he no longer had it, as we saw, it got chopped from his finger, then he lost the ability to sort of even exist in a corporeal form. So, and Sauron was using that. He was aiming this at the elves to get control over them. It certainly appears that if somebody of near equal power to him, like say Gandalf, got the ring, then it wouldn't be, or one of those other rings, it wouldn't necessarily bring him under Sauron's power. But it would cause them to go down the Sauron route in terms of wanting power for themselves. Now, Sauron himself, this was one of the things that he could do, is get people under his control. Saruman, he didn't control him, but he managed to get him onto his side. And when he couldn't control somebody with his mind, as bizarrely, if you've only seen the films, you perhaps don't understand the magnificence of Denethor. With Denethor, although he had contact effectively with Sauron through the Palantiri, he resisted Sauron's control because of the strength of his mind. Matthew Hawkins. Hi, Robert. It's been a couple of years since I last sent you a question. Still really enjoying your live stream. Well, great to see you. I recently listened to the Lord of the Rings audiobook for the umpteenth time. Still love it. One thing that's always fascinated and frustrated me is the story of how Gollum was sprung from prison in Mirkwood. Legolas states in the Council of Elrond that the orcs that attacked the woodland realm were strangers and not used to the forest. The orcs know Gollum would be up a tree on Midsummer's Eve. Where did the orcs come from? Who sent them? Sauron or Saruman? How did they get the information? It's a pity this was never elaborated on. Yeah, so it sort of is elaborated. Basically, what happens, and this is Sauron's idea, that half works and half really doesn't work. So Sauron captures Gollum. This is before the main story of the Lord of the Rings. He captures Gollum, and we're going to see some of this in the Hunt for Gollum film, I feel sure, whenever that comes out. He captures Gollum, tortures him, gets information out of him, and it becomes very clear he gets the backstory. He knows Gollum found the ring. Gollum was under control of the ring and had been for 500 years. And then it's gone, and Gollum knows that he's got these words, Baggins, Shire, and Sauron knows he doesn't know Baggins, he doesn't know Shire. And so his thought is, what's the best way to use Gollum? Now, he could have just killed him, but his thought was, this guy will lead me to the ring. This guy is obsessed with the ring. He was right. Gollum was. He was not going to give up. Nothing. He would just keep on going until he found the ring. So he said, I'm just going to release him. And I'm going to keep an eye on him. And he's going to end up showing me where the ring is. And if he gets the ring and he uses it, then I will find out. And I will be able to get it off of him because he's not a threat. Gollum with the ring is not going to be a threat to me. So that's the plan. He thought this was foolproof. And so he sends out Gollum. And then Gollum gets captured. And so after Gollum goes up to Northern Mirkwood, and he's there, and Gandalf has sort of rather roughly interrogated him, from what we can understand. Then Sauron thinks, well, he's not doing me any good there. If anything, they're now getting information from him about me, and this isn't good. So he will release him, and let's go back to the original plan. And so they are Sauron's orcs who went to release Gollum and send him back out into the wild. Martin S. I think the Ainur, having entered Ea, that's the world, have three known tiers in a sense. Adatar, number one. Number two is non-Adatar Valar, and three Maiar. One or greater than two. Of course, in many contexts, one and two are in one group, Valar. Yeah, so there are tiers. There are levels to this in terms of power, and so Manwë is obviously the most important. But you get the top tier in the Valar, you get the top tier, and then you get the rest who are less powerful. Let's go to okay. So those are the Lord of the Rings questions. I've got some other random questions. Gina Z saying, "Hi Robert, I was wondering if you'd ever consider covering Robin Hobb's Farseer trilogy. How much do you think we can glean about Jon Snow's fate from that Fitz-chivalry Farseer? I know the authors are friends, but even so, I was struck by some of the similarities between the two two series. I'm currently reading through Hobb's entire Realm of the Elderling series. And it is quite magnificent. I almost can't bear to start the last trilogy because then it will be over." Well, first of all, yeah, I agree. I think Robin Hobb is a fantastic writer. Also, with her actual name, Megan Lindholm, if you ever come across that, some fantastic stories. Wizard of the Pigeons is an entirely random book I read ages ago. Great fun. But yes, so the connection between these two, I was looking at this a little bit. I'm writing a little bit about Jon and his fate, and spoilers here for the Farseer trilogy. By the way, if you're wanting to read that and don't want to know anything, skip forward, I would say, about 2 minutes now. So yes, the similarities are very clear. So this is set in the six duchies, which is somewhere which is threatened by fantasy zombies who are starting to invade the land, and might at some point be saved by turning dragons from stone into flesh. The main character we have here is the bastard son of the crown prince, who has the ability to skin change and to walk into the wolf that he has formed a bond with. So the links across are very strong. What happens to, and this is the spoiler bit, what happens to Fitz, as his name is, Fitz-chivalry, is that he is killed, like Jon. He's buried, and but his spirit goes into his wolf. His friends then dig him up, revive the body. Another very strong skin changer goes into the wolf, kicks out Fitz, and pushes him back into his own body. And this, I think, is a hint of what is going to be happening with Jon. Now, the intriguing thing is that George R. R. Martin, I mean, I couldn't immediately put my finger on the quotes, but I know that he has said that having seen, they did develop these ideas at the same time with the same editor, I think. They did see advanced copies of the two books. But George R. R. Martin, I think, has said that it's not that he's copied this in any way. However, the way that Robin Hobb dealt with this whole issue of skin changing had many more layers than he'd originally thought about. And so he sort of upped his game of what he included in A Song of Ice and Fire in order to kind of match that. And I think one thing in particular I would take as a takeaway from this to look out for is when Fitz gets pushed back into his own body after having been in his wolf for a while, you then get an actually quite long period where he is wolfish. he's in a human body, but he's lived as a wolf for so long that he sees things, he wants to experience things in a wolfish way. And that, I think, is something that we have to expect with Jon. What does that mean? Is he going to be more feral? Is he going to be more of a lone wolf? Is he going to want to be more pack? I don't know, but he's going to be more wolfish. But as for, am I going to be covering that? And also Diego Godoy linked to this. Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. This week I finished reading the first book in the trilogy of the Three Body Problem. Would you be interested in covering other book series such as this?" So, first about the Three Body Problem. If you've not read it, I've also read the first book. I read that just before the TV show came out, the Three Body Problem TV show. The TV show is actually pretty good. It's a lot of Game of Thrones fans noted the fact this was the first thing that the showrunners of Game of Thrones did after Game of Thrones. And it also is, I think, the biggest budget drama Netflix have ever done. Both of which kind of coloured, I think, a lot of people's impressions of it. But it's actually a pretty good series, it has to be said, and a pretty good adaptation. There are some things I think could have worked better. They shifted it. The books are very focused in on China. The author is Chinese, and they kind of abandoned that and shifted it over to a more Western approach, and introduced more sort of sympathetic young 20, 30 something characters. I understand why, but perhaps I think it could have worked a little bit better as it was in the novel. I think it's good. I think it's good. I think the book is good. It's not always easy reading, it has to be said. Sometimes it can be quite hard going, but it is very good and very imaginative. So, but the bigger question, would I cover any of these other book series? Yeah, I'm expanding out. I started out when I was doing this channel. I basically started out doing Game of Thrones. Did a couple of other random things. I did Sherlock ages ago. Used to love that show. But in terms of book series, the Song of Ice and Fire expanded out into Lord of the Rings. Do a little bit of Witcher every now and then, as you know. I'm very open to expanding that out even future and even further in the future. So yes, I think realistically, given and I might be wrong in this, but the impression I've sort of got over the last while is that the two franchises, though I don't like the word, two franchises that seem to have the greatest crossover in terms of people who've been asking for them within this fandom are Wheel of Time and Dune. So if I were to expand out, probably one of those ones would be next. Charis Ballerina, do you believe that Ulmo helped Bilbo with the fish riddle by making one jump out of the water? Are there other instances in Middle-earth where you think he secretly helped through the water? I mean, I don't know about the fish riddle thing. I would have to look at that again. My instinct is probably not Ulmo. He's not Lord. He's Lord. Yes, he's Lord of Water, but the Valar, they have people that they delegate certain things to, and the stuff that Ulmo basically does is the oceans. And so whenever we sort of like whenever in the first age he would sort of more directly intervene, he had to wait for humans to get all the way over to the west coast before he could kind of appear and do stuff. So my instinct is probably not in some dank cavern under the Misty Mountains, but hey, who knows? Where else might he have intervened? Well, the banks of the River Anduin, where Faramir and Boromir got their vision, the Anduin is a massive river. So as much as he is an ocean-going person, if he was going to be whispering something up a river, it would be up the Anduin River. Beyond that, how has he helped when there was a good wind, it has to be said, from that helped Aragorn, again coming up the Anduin River, sail up to join the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. That is another thing which is often attributed to the Valar and Ulmo and Manwë in that instance. But most of the time within the Lord of the Rings, it has to be said they're not on the coast. So Ulmo's role is a little bit more limited than perhaps he would otherwise have done. Ulmo, of all of the Valar, is the one who takes the most active interest in the doings of humans and elves. We're told that he never abandoned the children of Ilúvatar, even when all of the other Valar did. Martin S. saying, I think Robin Hobb has similarities with George R. R. Martin, but George R. R. Martin has a far greater number of houses. Anyway, I had a Patreon question about Faramir. Yes, you did, and that's coming up. Yes, that's coming up in just a minute or two. That's on my list. Do not worry, that is coming up. I should probably also say, having highlighted the link across to the Farseer trilogy. The one, and I've not read this for a long time, but the one that a lot of people mark across the similarities to is the Memory, Sorrow and Thorn trilogy by Tad Williams. Dragonbone Chair is the first one there. Which, as I said, I've not read that for a long time. I can remember really enjoying it at the time, but that was before I read A Song of Ice and Fire, so I wasn't really looking out for similarity there. Derry's read it before, saying, for those with questions, I cover Hobbes' world in the same detail as Robert does A Song of Ice and Fire. I've read all available annually since 2001. Well, there you go. Look, on... So somebody put it. If somebody puts a link in the chat, that would be great. Oh, here we go. So Carl Stark, thank you very much for putting the link across there. So Derry's read it before. Do go and check them out. Question from. So yeah, that's the realm of the Elderlings. I think that's the full title from the series as a whole. Maura Lee, will you be doing any more readings of the books on your channel with Aziz as guests? What about other interviews? Aziz, yeah, definitely. We'll have him back on again at some point, I am sure. As for other interviews, yes, I've not lined up anything yet, but that's certainly part of the plan. Phelan Walker saying, hi, Robert, hope you're well. I am, thank you. I'd love some lore on Dan the dog. I will... This is a live stream about Lord of the Rings and the Song of Ice and Fire, but Dan the dog is a greyhound, which means that he hails from Ireland because, fun fact, most of the greyhounds in the UK actually were born in Ireland, because in Ireland they breed and train those dogs for racing. And Dan is a rescue from racing. So yes, although he's not got his little doggy passport, that's where he's from. He came from across the Irish Sea. Martin S. The Dragonbone chair, aside from the first novel, is also the in-story piece of furniture equivalent of the Iron Throne. Yes, absolutely. Let's go to... and here, Martin S. Here's your question. and you will get to it eventually, saying, I think the Tolkien fandom has been fairly lenient on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy when it comes to changes. For instance, Faramir at first intending to bring Frodo and Sam with the ring to Minas Tirith before changing his mind during the Battle of Osgiliath. That makes Faramir's judgment significantly worse in the movies than in the novels. Meanwhile, Star Wars fans can get upset about Greedo shooting first, or Han and Greedo shooting at the same time, instead of Han shooting first, in Star Wars Episode 4. Arguably a personality change for Han, but no worse than the aforementioned one for Faramir, in my opinion. What do you think? So, what I think in terms of, well, Faramir as a character, yes, absolutely. I wouldn't go as far as saying they'd done him a dirty in the films, but of all the characters, his is one of the ones that is shifted more. In an attempt to both add to dramatic tension with his Frodo and Sam's encounter with him, but also to add in a little bit of extra time. If you look at the way that they structured the films, they've actually shifted it between films 2 and 3. They've shifted a few things around in order. And stretched a couple of things in order to make them work better as films. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings. We think of it as being in 3 books. He wrote it as one long book. It just had to be broken down into 3 because of paper shortages in post-war England. But so they wanted to shift a few things around. I mean, overall, as I'm sure I've said, love those films, and I know many, many people do. What you say though about the Tolkien fandom being fairly lenient on the films, I think. I mean, far be it from me to sort of comment on behalf of the fandom as a whole. I think it's a bit more divided. The deeper into the Tolkien fandom you get, the more divided you think you'll get it. I mean, I've been lucky enough to chat to heads of several Tolkien societies around the world, and a lot of other people sort of in the center, other content creators, academics working on Tolkien things. I would say that the deeper into the heart of the Tolkien really nerdy community, the more likely you are to find people who don't like the films. Most, I think you're right. Probably the overwhelming view is that people love the films, but there definitely have come across quite a few people who don't, because they don't stick to the story at every point. So there's that. You talking about Star Wars fans getting upset about Greedo shooting first or not. My general take is that there is a difference, for me at least. There's a difference between something like Star Wars, which started out as a film, and so what you're doing is, if you're just updating what is in that film canon, whereas everything that happens Tolkien-wise on the big screen is an adaptation of what happened in the books. So you can always go back to the books, and therefore you can have a legitimate reason for saying, well, hang on a moment, why did you do that? Because it's clearly different in the books. There is no books. Yes, there are now Star Wars books, but there is no fundamental starting point book for something like Star Wars. Right. Let's go to Maura Lee. Actually, this is my last question from my patrons. So now, if you've got any more questions, now is the time to drop them into the chat. I'll try and pick up as much of that as I can. Maura Lee asking for an update on shows we're looking forward to this year. And Night of the Seven Kingdoms, anything on House of the Dragon, Rings of Power. So where we're at on all of these things. House of the Dragon, season 3 will definitely happen. We've started seeing shots of table reads. All the cast gathered round, reading the script, and that means that they will be filming shortly. Rings of Power has been formally and officially renewed for season 3. We're starting to get casting rumours. They've not yet started filming, but my understanding is they will start in the not too distant future, in the next, I don't know, month or two, something like that. So they're not going to be too far behind. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, we have no particular update on since last time. This they filmed it. They're already looking at they're doing the scripts for season 2 in anticipation of this being a success, which everything I've heard so far seems to suggest it might be. And obviously the cast will grow up quite quickly, so they need to film things relatively swiftly as well, so that Egg stays quite small for as many series of this as we can possibly manage. But that's not going to air until the second half of this year, probably towards the end of the year, I think is the answer. They, as I say, they filmed it. It's going to be 6 episodes. George R. R. Martin has seen all 6 episodes, loves it. He's seen the first 4 in final cut, the other 2 in a draft format. So it's there. It's nearly ready. Don't expect huge amounts from that just yet until we're getting a little. They might do a teaser trailer or something at some point, but yeah, that's going to take a little while. But this is quite a. I found this is actually quite a good year. We've got a number of things, and/or season 2 is going to be coming out, which I'm very much looking forward to. If you enjoy Squid Game season 3 is going to be coming out, and there's a few other things coming out that I can't even remember right now. But yeah, Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, something to look forward to. Martin S. I would say for Tad Williams, he is one of the better fantasy authors in terms of prose. This is Tad Williams. He did the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I think Tolkien is the best I've read, but I would probably set Tad Williams as a second. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd put George R. R. Martin second myself, or equal to Tolkien in different ways. Carl Karsnark saying Dragon Demands channel has a video up now about the latest casting details. Do go and check that out, Dragon Demands. If you've not come across Dragon Demands, he is in charge of the Song of Ice and Fire wiki pages, so he knows his stuff, and often does videos with this kind of like background about when TV shows are coming out and stuff like that. So do go and check that out. Last of Us season 2, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, that's something else. Peredo Gladioli or Gladioli. Have you read Catherine Kerr's Devery cycle of fantasy novels, Daggerspell, etc.? I definitely did read Daggerspell. I'm going to say decades ago, which makes me feel older than I would like. But yeah, I quite enjoyed that. I don't think I've read through the whole series of that one, though. Chloe Leanne asking what my thoughts on Severance season 2. Yeah, that's another good thing which has come out this year. I've not managed to. I've got a number of things on the go. It has to be said, because we've got Wheel of Time, which has just started up as well, which I quite enjoyed. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Severance 2, I really liked Severance season 1. Severance season 2, I've not managed to watch this whole season yet. Have we had the finale yet? I don't know. I was waiting for the whole thing to finish, and then I was going to binge my way through it. What answers do I hope to get in the season finale? And your video convinced me to watch it. Good. Well, I'm glad, because it's really good. If you've not watched Severance, do go and watch that. I've also randomly, we're sort of going off in many a digression now, TV shows, randomly been also watching Foundation, which I'd not I'd not watched before. As I said, I'd not watched before. I'd watched the first episode of season one. I was on a plane, and it was on one of those tiny little screens that was stopping every 5 minutes for the pilot to tell me what the airspeed was and the temperature outside or whatever. It wasn't the best viewing experience. But having then sat down and watched it on my TV at home, great. I really, really love it. Fantastic. If you like proper sci-fi, that's there. And it's been again. It's been a long time since I've read Foundation, the Asimov novels. So I didn't really have a hard idea in my mind about what to expect, but it's very good. The new Assassin's Creed game is out, says Amy Smith. Yep, that's if you enjoyed them. I saw that. I think I've heard good things about that one. And yeah, I think that's me caught up in the chat. Okay, so with that, and there was lots of tea talk, which is very exciting. Chloe Leanne says the finale airs at 2 a.m. UK time, as in half an hour. Okay, right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. So next week we will be back with another. Have I got another chat come in? Martin S saying it's easy to hate the villains in Robin Hobb's novels. For some reason, they seem to hit me harder on an emotional level. Yeah, they're very very quite. They are. They're quite visceral and very personal. I found that it's Robin Hobb's style. You inhabit the character a lot more of the person, as opposed to say in Tolkien moves around a lot between different characters and often kind of zooms out to a lot more omniscient narrator kind of approach, or zooms off to give us a paragraph from a random fox's perspective at one wonderful point. George R. R. Martin will do chapters from a particular person's point of view, but Robin Hood, because we're sort of moving through this largely through this Fitz's perspective, you actually in this first novels you feel what he is feeling so much more is what I think. So the writing style means that when you get somebody who has got a personal grudge against you, Fitz, then you feel it more. And particularly when it seems unfair, because you know what you've been through, and when people are accusing you of things that you may or may not have done, but you just think that is not right, and I do not deserve this, it can hit harder, and the bad guys feel worse on a more personal level. Derry's read it before, agreeing with me. Good. I like it when the experts agree with it. Hobb is a very character-driven, and the plot is secondary. Yeah, you said it better than me. Do go check out Derry's read it before channel. Haven't seen it, but I will go and have a look myself actually after this. So anyway, let's. What should we do? I've got more videos coming out on the main channel. Can't remember what they are, but I do know that I've just started doing a few Zora High ones, so that's going to be coming up over the course of the next few weeks. I don't know what I'm going to do next week. I think, yes, I've been meaning to do this for a while. Patrons, I'm going to be coming out to you, asking about thoughts about what we do on these live streams. What I quite like to do is get back into doing a few more of these kind of series where we can deep dive into things as we're going through them. So look out for something, patrons. But if you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around about here is going to be a link to more live streams. Appearing somewhere around here, it's going to be a link to my Patreon page. If you wish to support this channel, that is the best way to do it. Patrons, thank you. Again, I hugely appreciate you. And moderators, you've been doing a wonderful job, as you always do. Thank you very much indeed. If you're watching the chat, give them a last bit of mod love as well. But I think that is that for now. feel like there was something else I was going to say, but it can wait for next time. So take care, everyone, and I will see you same time next week. Bye.